You're listening to the Skeptics Guide to the Universe, your escape to reality.
Hello and welcome to the Skeptics Guide to the Universe. Today is Thursday, July 9th, 2026, and this is your host, Stephen Novella. Joining me this week are Bob Novella.
Hey, everybody.
Kara Santamaria.
Howdy.
Jay Novella.
Hey, guys.
And we have a guest this week, David Kyle Johnson, who goes by Kyle. So, Kyle, welcome to the show.
Salutations from these things.
You've been on the show a couple of times before. You are one of our recurring philosophers. It was like chatting with philosophers because they actually know what they're talking about.
We try.
Yeah, so this is kind of a follow-up. You're going to join us for the whole show as a guest rogue, but the reason why I wanted to bring you on was to follow up from our discussion about basically the philosophy of scientific skepticism we were talking about last week, and we're going to tighten that up a bit and get into the weeds a little bit more.
Yep, as much as you
Absolutely. And I do want to say to the listeners, though, just as a heads up, this is the last regular episode that we're recording, quote unquote, in studio for a month. The next 4 episodes are going to be all episodes that we record on the road.
Do you know, because of the dramatic way that you just said that, the panic that ensued in so many listeners when they heard you say, this will be the last regularly recorded episode.
Yes, the nanosecond of panic.
For a month.
But it's also important to note that, if the apocalypse happens and we don't mention it, that's why we're not mentioning it, because we're back in time.
It's true. So yeah, the next 4 episodes will have been recorded from when we were traveling or pre-recorded in
so I have
studio.
3 episodes in the can, and those will cover us for the 3 weekends, basically, that we're traveling. And then the last episode we record on the road, which will be in Christchurch, New Zealand, because it'll be basically the Saturday before it goes up the following week. That'll be the 4th episode.
Nice.
And then we'll be back in the studio.
Are you guys ready? I can't believe this snuck up on us so fast. We literally leave in 1 week and 2 days.
Kara, I was talking to Bob.
We leave in 1 week.
Yeah, you guys leave in 1 week. Wow.
So Bob was saying like, I've got to prep this news item and, I got to pack. And I'm like, oh, Bob, that is so adorable. I'm like, I am in the complete thick of it, heat of pulling all the strings to get everything ready to go, like from dealing with all the vendors for the swag that we're buying and all the venues and everything. Like, it's just a million details. Like, we had a major issue with the board meeting thing that we're doing in Australia that I had to solve. But that's what happens like the last week or 2 before a big conference. That's when all the heat gets turned on.
Right. And that's just the conference, not to mention getting there, every hotel we have to stay in along the way, like all of the logistical stuff for the travel on top of all of the work stuff.
It's international, so does everybody get their visas? We have to make sure.
Kara, did I tell you, like one of our Airbnbs that we are renting, the guy sold it.
Please tell me it's not the one that we were going to stay in Sydney.
No, you're all good.
I love that Airbnb.
But this was a multi-week rigmarole.
No.
Because the guy sold it and then went and ghosted everybody. Then the new company emails us, but me and my wife were like, this has got to be a scam because it just seemed totally scammy. They wanted to do a direct bank transfer, and I'm just like, ding, ding, ding. No, what? Like, no way am I doing a direct bank transfer with rental company XYZ out of nowhere, Yeah. So we had to verify everything, and then we finally tracked down the guy that we did the original rental from. Then we had to go through all this rigmarole with Airbnb. It was a complete mess. And thank God my wife was helping me because she's really good at Airbnb and she knows how to deal with Airbnb because she's the one that typically does the rentals. But oh my God, the amount of emails and nonsense just to move over to the new.
So it's the same place. It's just a different owner now?
Well, it went from a single person owner to a company.
But Airbnb should be handling all of that.
Well, they didn't know anything. We told them what was going on.
That's so insane.
And then they slip you into the black box so exquisitely. They're like, we tell them what's going on, and then they're like, we will research this and get back to you. And then I'm like, wait. We're leaving in 2 weeks, dude. Yeah. This can't be you contact me via email 6 months from now. I need a resolution tomorrow.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then just recently there was the nunchuck hubbub.
Oh yeah.
I just happened to mention on the live stream on Wednesday that I'm doing a nunchuck demo in Sydney, and a lot of people were then like, "Wait a second, you got to really check this more closely because it's really like not legal in Sydney." Now, I made the incorrect assumption that a foam nunchuck would not be a problem because it's foam. It's like cosplay. It's a training. I could literally whack you in the head with this foam nunchuck, and you'd be like, "What the hell are you doing?" And that'd be the extent of your reaction. And apparently, even these foam ones are not allowed to be brought in. You have to go through this whole rigmarole of filling out forms and doing all this stuff. I'm like, well, that's not going to happen. So we got to get a workaround, and it's just like, holy crap, man! Just even a foam nunchuck. I never would have guessed the foam would have been a problem.
And that is literally the smallest, least of our problems.
Of course.
Bob's
Yeah,
nunchuck
right.
fiasco.
But it's my biggest one.
I know the one that sticks the most. Well, maybe not the most in Jay's craw because you have a lot of things you're dealing with, but it's the 15-pound cutoff for a carry-on bag in New Zealand when the bag
bags.
itself weighs 8 pounds.
17 or 18.
It's so stupid.
Empty bag. So if you filled it with a vacuum, you might be able to use it.
Oh boy.
But it'll happen. All these different threads will come together, and it'll be a seamless experience.
Seamless. Completely.
Right, Steve?
Yeah, it's a logistical nightmare, but we're handling it. All right, Bob, you're going to start us off with a quickie.
Okie dokie. Thank you, Steve. This is your Quickie with Bob. So, guys, this is a study that was published in Nature Physics, provided a new molecular level evidence for this long debated idea in water physics that I wasn't aware of anyway, that liquid water may not be one structurally uniform substance, but really this constantly shifting mixture of two distinct microscopic structures. Like I said, the idea has been around for decades. Now, according to this two-state model, liquid water can be viewed as a kind of a mixture of these two local structures. One is denser and more disordered. The other is less dense and more ordered, right? And it kind of makes sense when you think about how weird water is. Professor Xiaozheng Zheng from City University of Hong Kong said this: according to the two-state hypothesis, water can be viewed as a mixture of two distinct structures, A and B, but no one has seen a genuine pure A or pure B form of liquid water. And because of this lack of direct molecular evidence, the model remained controversial. So some of you may have guessed that this model has been used for years now to help explain why water is just so weird, right? Compared to other liquids. It is unique. I mean, for example, it becomes easier to compress as it cools, which you might not be aware of. Classically, water is seen as incompressible, right? But you can compress it a bit, but it's easier to compress it a little bit as it gets cooler. Why is that? The other one, which you may be aware of, is that water reaches maximum density at 4 degrees Celsius, instead of at its freezing point.
Depending on salinity, there's some variability there.
Yeah, totally. But still kind of weird. Like, why wouldn't it just do it at freezing point? So in this new study, researchers used simulations and unsupervised deep learning techniques to search for these hidden structural fingerprints in water molecules that are just so hard to tease out of water any other way. The model was trained on tens of millions of local water molecule configurations and was designed to let the data kind of just reveal these patterns that traditional methods just couldn't cleanly separate. So the results show that two distinct clusters emerged. There's a structure A, which was denser and more disordered, structure B, which was less dense and more ordered, as I've been saying. The study also found that the balance between these two structures, because they're they describe it as intraconvertible. Is that it? Intraconvertible? Where they can kind of change into each other, so that these two structures can change at various times depending on what the temperature and the pressures are. So it's a simple water, right? Water, you think, is the definition of simplicity, right? But it's just endlessly fascinating and complex. So this has been your two-state quickie with Bob. Back to you, Steve.
So you know what this reminds me of whenever I hear structure and water?
Yes, I do. Pseudoscience crap.
Of homeopathy, because this is now the new thing, not that new, being last 20 years or whatever, that homeopaths are saying to explain their magic water and how there could be no remaining solute left behind, but it still has some kind of properties. It's because water itself is structured as now they throw the word nano in there as if that's supposed to mean something.
Yeah.
It's nano-structured. And by coincidence, you guys remember who Dana Ullman is?
Oh, I saw the emails.
Oh, yeah, you saw them. So Dana Ullman he is a homeopathy apologist who occasionally harasses us. He's really a true believer and just a real, in my opinion, a classic pseudoscientist, like really trying to be scientific but distorting it beyond all recognition. I mean, he believes homeopathy works. That's like you need to say anymore.
Yeah,
And
really don't.
I mean, he's
Well, not just that he believes homeopathy. He's a homeopath, right?
yeah. But he's
okay.
like he wrote letters saying, "Oh, you censored me on science-based money. What are you afraid?" Meaning, meanwhile, his comment was blocked by Discus. We had nothing to even do with it. Yeah, but that's such a classic childish internet, kind of thing to do, and that's what we're basically dealing with. But he does the same thing. He did something absolutely amazing in this exchange. I don't know if you guys caught this. He was trying to convince me that he has some validity to what he's saying because he asked ChatGPT and it gave him the answer he
my God.
wanted.
That was
dude,
ridiculous.
You gotta be kidding me.
Yes,
His evidence was his conversations with ChatGPT.
that's correct.
Beautiful.
Right. So I just responded, you clearly also don't know how LLMs work. There actually is evidence that the way you frame the question, that because of the sycophancy thing, it's basically to tell you it's going to buy your premise and tell you what you want to hear.
Of course, that's how.
Yeah, I tried when I'm dealing with ChatGPT in that way. I tried to never let it know what I'm thinking. I wanted to. What does the science say about this? And don't give it any hints of where it might be sycophantic to me. It's like, I hate that.
He's not the first guy to do that to me, and so the last time somebody did that to me, I'm like, all right, here. So I asked it a question from my perspective and got a completely different answer, and I sent that back to the guy.
And then he said, "Oh yeah."
It's like, come on, it's like you can't freaking use ChatGPT as evidence. That's we've talked about this. It's like people treat it like an oracle.
Yep.
Yes.
It's just incredible how fast that happened. And in fact, we're going to have 2 AI-related news items. It's kind of hard to avoid, so much going on. But Jay, you're going to start us off. Kyle, you're a professor, right?
I certainly am.
You teach students?
I certainly do, about 100 every semester.
What do you do?
Kyle, wait, you can read, right?
I am also literate. Yes, I am.
You know words, don't you? What do you do to make sure your students aren't submitting AI-generated content?
Well, there is no way to guarantee that they can do that, but I have a few safeguards that I do. And I'm actually going to implement another one this next semester. So one of the things I do is, for one thing, I ban all technology in the classroom. No laptops, no phones, no tablets.
No pacemakers, no inhalers.
No pacemakers, no watches, no. So any kind of, you know what I mean, the tablets, laptops, etc.
External tech.
And that's mainly for attention purposes, though, to make sure that they're actually paying attention in class, because if you don't do that, they're doing whatever on their phone or laptops. But for ChatGPT for homework and stuff like that, a couple things I do is I assign physical books, reading in physical books, and then I assign written outlines or like handwritten outlines or handwritten reflections. Or if it's homework, like if I'm teaching logic and they're doing proofs, it's handwritten proofs and that kind of stuff. And they actually physically present it to me at the beginning of class. I look at it, I put a physical check mark on it to show that it was completed before class, and they can make corrections during class. And then they actually upload like a digital PDF of that, corrected work at the end of class. And I can look at it on my, on Moodle, which is our grading platform, to make sure that they did it and et cetera, et cetera. So I'm still working with digital. Now, of course, if they're like writing an outline or a summary, potentially they could scan the physical reading into a PDF, upload that to GPT, tell it to do an outline, and then they could physically write the outline that it gives them, so they're still using it, but at least it went through their brain. They're not just copying and pasting, right? So like that's kind of as good as I can do for those kind of daily assignments. For longer typed assignments that they're submitting on Moodle that they're using, I allow them to use Word for. Basically, I'm using either the kind of, detection software that comes with Moodle or some kind of online detection or something like that if I suspect something, knowing that it is not perfect, knowing that it can get things wrong. So it's just kind of an indication.
So does Turnitin do AI detection now?
Yes, it automatically, they have that integrated in. It's just a little thing at the bottom that says, gives you a percentage of how likely it is that, and I always forget whether it's telling me how likely it is that it's AI or how much of it of the paper is likely AI.
That's like a software that we've long used for detecting plagiarism. So now it also detects.
They've also, but I mean, it comes with a warning that tells you this is not necessarily accurate. Always be careful, et cetera, et cetera. The new thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to require them to write their paper on Google Docs. So they can't copy and paste into it. They have to write it on Google Docs because Google Docs does like a keystroke record. And if you want to, they would make it shareable with me via a link. And if I suspect that they have used AI, I can actually go and look at the Google Doc and actually have it replay for me the process of them writing the paper. And it should be fairly apparent whether or not they're doing huge copy and pastes, whether or not they're actually going back and revising. I mean, it would even be fairly clear if they got, ChatGPT to write it in one window and they're just typing it in another, right? Like, well, that looks a lot different than the actual process of writing a paper, which, calls for revisions and spell check and
Oh, God. So Jay, I don't know how much this relates to what you're about to talk about, but like that just seems like too much work.
It's a lot of work.
Kyle, if you're a teacher long enough, you might actually have to say this to your class. Class, during this test, no use of implants.
Turn your implants off. Yeah, that is
Get out of here, glass holes.
Yeah.
No room for
Augmented reality glasses are left outside.
Well, Jay, you're going to tell us about one approach to detecting AI cheating using other AI.
Yeah, and this is just a part, the stream of things that need to be done in order for us to adapt, like Kyle was saying. We have to adapt to this new technology. So this isn't a shocker to me in any way, but it is where we happen to be right now. So what's going on is that schools and universities, they're trying to combat students who are using AI systems to write essays or, definitely build software, doing various assignments. So these institutions, they are starting to lean on AI detection software that's going to help them figure out, or so they think, whether the work was generated by AI or not. And the technology companies that make these software, they're claiming that their tools can detect AI generated writing, and that's basically their claim. Yes, it can detect it. The claims aren't really completely legitimate, and I have a fun example to tell you guys. So this is a AI detection story that actually recently happened. So there was a chemistry undergraduate who was at Idaho State University, and while they were applying to PhD programs, she noticed that some PhD application portals were warning students on there that saying that their personal statements can be scanned for AI-generated text, and they will possibly be disregarded if they're flagged as such. And then she decided to test her own work before she submitted to any of these institutions. So what she did was she found some online websites, which you can easily do, and then she put in her work, whatever. She took snippets of her work, and guess what happened?
It flagged it.
It flagged it. Now, guess why it flagged it?
Because she was actually quite good at writing.
Exactly. She was competent. She was an actual English major as well, so she's a competent writer. So it said, no human can write this well. That's basically what the software is saying. This is beyond human skills. What she ended up doing was she ended up making grammatical errors.
Dumbing it down, man.
She dumbed down her writing.
Sucks.
She got it down to where it was only 30% likely to be AI generated. She submitted it, her applications were accepted, and she got a job.
That's embarrassing.
Wow, man.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Is that crazy? I hope the essay talked about that actual experience in it. So anybody who actually, because the funny thing is, are people even reading those essays, or are they making AIs read them?
They're making AIs read them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what, Kara?
Mm-hmm.
I wrote my essay.
I know. When he said that, I was like, oh, South Park. I laughed inside, but I didn't want to interrupt you, Jay.
Yeah.
Anytime someone says write an essay.
So what's going on here is that the software is being used to do things that it actually can't do completely well. And these tools don't prove if the materials were written by a human or an AI, right? It doesn't prove it. It just says it's probably, it's likely.
Well, and the problem is, even if they have a disclaimer, that in practice, nobody, well, maybe not, maybe Kyle, but very few other professors who are overwhelmed and busy are thinking in terms of the disclaimer. They're like, here's a tool. I'm going to use the tool. I'm going to assume the tool works.
Yeah, you have to assume laziness, even though it's not a good approach.
Yeah.
I think obviously it would be great if everyone were like Kyle, but it is a lot of work. And,
Exactly.
You know,
It's not even laziness, Steve, right? It's just
sometimes. Well, yeah.
There's only so many resources available.
Yeah. Sometimes it's laziness. Sometimes it's
And technically, you can use the quote unquote laziness to refer to all energy efficiency or energy saving approaches, even if it's not a vice. Right. So that's what I'm talking about. The people who, you're overworked, you're pressed for time, and here's this easy sort of way out, and it's easy to say, well, I'll just, let AI do it. But the false positive thing is probably the worst,
Yeah, that's
especially if they're
biggest problem.
Flagging, and this is true, this is the way they flag it. It's the markers of being written by an LLM now are basically markers of good writing, which is crazy.
That raises an interesting question for me, Jay. I'm curious. This is maybe more of a thought experiment, philosophical question, and maybe it gets to the heart of some of the things that you're talking about. But is there not a world wherein, instead of trying to say you can't use AI, professors just grade the papers based on how well they're written? And if a student masters the use of AI, that is probably a tool they're going to need in life anyway.
Exactly. It's going to change, Kara. This is just a temporary thing because it's only going to get better. It's going to get to the point where I don't think there'll be any chance of detection.
And will it matter? That's the thing. Is the new skill, and yes, I know I could argue until I'm blue in the face that this is, undermining critical thinking, but ultimately is the new skill for a student to prove competency in an academic setting and beyond to be able to seamlessly integrate these things.
But that's the $64,000 question, right? Is this just going to be a new tool that people use to get to the end result? Or is there something different about this where it actually makes people not think? And just
we will talk a little bit about that in a minute in a different way.
I think the evidence is clear on that, but this really is an arms race. And Steve, the false positives, is an important and concerning thing for especially the story that Jay just related. And I read about one model, Jay, it might have been in your talk here, your website link. Pangram Labs has a tool that has near zero false positive. Its approach is interesting. It has a training model based on a large corpus of human written works that have then been AI rewritten, right? So it has that in its training, and then when a new model comes out, it understands how the newly released chatbot writes, and apparently this is the method it's using now to get this near zero false positive rates, which not many systems have now. I mean, close to zero, and a lot of the good ones have 20-30% false positive, which is clearly way too big. And have you guys heard of humanizer tools?
Yeah.
You take the humanizer tools, you get your AI result, you plug it into the humanizer tool, and it dumbs it down automatically. It's just it's just total arms race.
Embarrassing, though. I mean, is the issue really whether or not you used it, or is the issue whether you used it competently? It's obvious when somebody uses AI poorly, so just grade the paper that way.
Well, it's not always obvious, Kara. So if I can add a little bit of nuance, I mean, Steve kind of captured it with the comment about the question is, are you actually thinking, right? So there's a lot of nuance here. So something that I use ChatGPT for is to format citations.
Yeah, why would you do that by hand?
Exactly, right? But
great.
Old school, people might think no, you got to have that skill of knowing where to put the periods and blah, blah, blah. No, who cares, right? And so in the same way, I don't really care that much if my students use Grammarly to correct their, because that's something, if they're writing papers, they're going to have that, whether they're in a job or whatever.
But some people would argue, Kyle, like an English professor would argue that is a fundamental skill they need, and they don't want them to take shortcuts for it.
Fair enough, right?
Right. So it depends on your discipline, I think.
It's like the math calculator argument too.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but I mean, definitely everyone's going to agree that we don't want AI doing their students' thinking for them. Mm-hmm. If nothing else, they need to be learning how to think for themselves. And it's hard to distinguish between students who wrote their own paper, but they're a little lazy with their grammar. They use Grammarly to clean it up, and then it comes across as an AI checker, and it looks like it was written by AI, versus someone who just has AI write the paper for them, and they copy and paste it and did no thinking at all. It's very hard to delineate between those two kinds of things. But I have an assignment where I like in my epistemology class last semester, and I was prompted to do this by the college itself. We had an assignment where I told them to use AI and like guided them through the process of using it as a research assistant. So you can use it to find research, like you can use it to come up with a topic that you want to write about, and then to develop a thesis that you will defend, and then to find research that will help you test that thesis and like arguments pro and con, et cetera. And then it will help you there's legitimate uses of it in that way.
But some would argue that is part of your thinking, that like it's, there's a difference between it replacing your thinking and it supporting your thinking. Or augmenting your thinking.
What about this idea, guys? I just thought of this. What if, and this would probably be too time consuming, but what if you had like an in-class essay writing where you wrote enough essays in class? Obviously, you cannot have any help with technology. That way you have a base of like, this is how this person writes. And then you compare that to what they turn in. And if it's clearly far superior to anything they've written by hand, you could more reliably conclude that, they probably had too much AI help with this one, because this is not like anything that they wrote by themselves.
That's a good idea. That's the authorship approach. And you could use AI to detect authorship. So now you're not just asking, does this essay look like a human wrote it or an AI wrote it? You're asking, does this look like Jay wrote it? Because I have samples of Jay's writing. But of course, that's difficult too, because people can use Grammarly, or they could have somebody proof it for them, or they could...
No. In class...
No, I'm talking about when they later submit something, there could be... Anything written in class obviously is fine.
But that's the thing. There's going to be a quality difference between something you scratch off in class.
But if you use all of these tools, then you're getting somewhere.
Right. And so then they'll come up with not a humanizer tool, they'll come up with a Jayizer tool. Well, like, make this more like how I write.
Oh, Bob, of course. Look, it's all going to happen. It'll absolutely get to the point where where AI is going to be able to fake anybody's writing style. It's going to be able to fake. I mean, I'm already seeing really good AI generated movies and voice work, whatever you want to call it. AI generated voice that is almost as good as a real movie. It's getting very nuanced, and it's only going to get better. And I would imagine with all the money that's being dumped into it, that we're going to see things progressing even faster than they are today.
The advantage here is that it could take a while to get a full assessment of your writing. I mean, how much do you have to write for it to know how you write? I mean, and people might not want to do that outside of the class because it's just a time consuming.
A few thousand words. It's not that onerous.
A few thousand?
Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, does this not speak to the heart of like the spirit and the purpose of academia? I think that there's this layer early in academia, like this, the first several years of an undergraduate degree, where there's a tease apart that happens between the students who are motivated to learn and who are going into academia to be engaged with academia, and the students who feel whatever it is, familial pressure, societal pressure to just get the degree so they can have the piece of paper so that they can get the job. And maybe as a culture, we need to be thinking about tracking those things out differently. I just don't understand why people who are people who have an honest interest in academics would cheat.
Yeah, you're cheating yourself.
Right.
It only harms yourself. Right. Yeah, it's such a weird thing. And
I had one college professor say that to me. It's like they're spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 to come to this college. If they want to cheat themselves out of an education, that's on them.
That's what I always used to say. I'm like, you don't want to show up? I get paid either way if you pass or fail.
Yeah, but there's I mean, it depends on your college, right? So I want to have that attitude. I want to have the attitude of, you want to cheat your way out of your education, that's fine. If you want to slack off and fail the class or whatever and then have to drop out, that's fine. But the problem with my situation is that King's is tuition driven. And so my job depends largely on me being able to keep students in my classroom and there for the whole semester and not dropping out and finishing and going the whole 4 years and that kind of stuff. So there's this pressure on me to bend over backwards to make sure that they pass, right?
Yeah, that's where incentivization can become perverse at a certain point.
Yes, it can, right? So on one end, that's good, right? Like I'm looking out for them, I'm doing all I can to help them or whatever, but also there's this kind of incentive to look the other way. Or,
you see that with student athletes a lot.
Yes.
These are,
This is why college should be free. This is why college should be free for everyone.
100%. I'm with you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
What about the idea that a lot of times when you get your degree and then you get a job in the field, and what you learned in school was really largely irrelevant to the actual job description.
Which is why it's a totally different thing to go to college for the job or to go to college to better yourself, to improve your academic and intellectual capabilities. Those are two different things.
Yeah, I got to tell you, teaching medical students, they really want to learn.
Yeah, they're
because
motivated
this is their
and they don't want to
career.
cheat. That'd be crazy. There may be some inflection points where there's motivation to cheat, like getting the right grade to be, like a bottleneck thing. If I can pass this thing, it opens up this next stage of my career.
No, but like day to day in training, like they really know that they need to know this stuff just to survive in their career. So they're highly motivated.
Yeah, the problem sometimes I have, though, is like even some academically motivated students who are like that will not think that about philosophy. So they'll think like, well, this isn't one of my major courses, so I don't care. They put all their work into their major classes, and then they think they can blow off philosophy because it doesn't matter. When I'm teaching them like the basics of critical thinking and how to reason and how to read a piece of read something and construct an argument, right? Like, and they don't understand that. They think it's just floofy, whatever.
Academically, I think you should have to take core courses at the beginning to be exposed to a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people would change their mind if they were given the sort of, the freedom to feel like they're allowed to do that.
I cannot tell you how many students I've had that are like, I did not know what philosophy was. I thought it was a waste of time. This is incredible. I want to do more of it. But I'm a senior now, so I can't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Kara, you also have an AI themed news item here. Are teens using AI chatbots as companions?
Yes, this is coming from a psychological perspective because this is a study that was published by. It's actually a really cool group. It's a psychologist and I think a graduate student and a postdoc and 2 high school students who co-published this paper in the Lancet Child and Adolescent Health called How Interactional AI May Alter Adolescent Relational Learning and Mental Health. And there were 2 big takeaways from doing this study where they talked to a bunch of students to try and understand their relationship with AI, specifically AI chatbots, their relationship with them, how they use them in their lives, and maybe some of the benefits, but also some of the big risks that we need to be looking at. So they cite outside data that show, like Pew Research data and some other organizations like the Center for Democracy and Technology, that show that about 64% of U.S. adolescents are actively engaging with conversational AI. So that's a lot. It's, the majority. They also found that around 42% of teenagers are using chatbots for friendship-related advice, and 19% admit to leveraging them to navigate their romantic relationships. Okay, so keep those things in mind. They also, this is one other really important thing, they also said that most of the kids that they talked to in this study explicitly said, like, age gates don't work. Anytime there's age verification, they just get right around it. And any parental control restrictions, they just don't work. Don't hold your breath. That's not the approach here. Everybody's using it anyway, even if they're underage. So there were 2 big themes that they identified in their study that they dug deeper into. And so think of these as like constructs. The first one was something that they called the threat of relational displacement. And the second one was something that they called the mechanism of maladaptive relational learning, because they are academics. So let's break down what that actually means.
Yeah.
The threat of relational displacement, really, if you sit with it for a second, it does start to make sense, right? AI chatbots have a standing risk, a threat of displacing traditional relationships in people's lives. So if young people use AI interactions instead of real-world conversations with people, what do you think is going to happen? And Steve, you touched on this during Jay's talk. What's the biggest thing that AI is sort of trained to do?
The sycophancy issue?
Yeah, they're going to keep you engaged with the AI and not actually dealing with this with the actual people that you need to be talking to, the real people.
And so there's that point, Bob, is a really good one, right? It's going to keep you coming back, and it's going to keep you out of the engagement with people. But even beyond that, what happens then when you turn around and you do want to talk to your boyfriend or your girlfriend?
Yeah, it's more work emotionally, and it's not as satisfying, and you're sort of normalized to the sycophancy.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to feel what? Rejected?
And
you're going to feel
mad,
confused, conflicted. You're going to have ambivalent feelings, and you may not be developing the appropriate emotional regulation to be able to navigate real world interactions, which are not clean, and they're not all about you. Yeah. You know, there's a lot of conflict in the real world, and the skill of having, psychological resilience is not about never feeling anything. It's about feeling really hard things and learning how to process them, learning how to get through them. So if you're never having difficult conversations with people in your everyday lives, and you're never having ruptures and repairs, you're never learning how to have humility in that moment, you're never feeling the rage or the confusion or the sadness well up and then learning how to cope with those feelings, the outcome is very likely either going to be more social isolation or the potential for violence. Let's be honest here. We need emotion regulation to avoid dangerous interactions in this world. So I think that's a really important thing. These critical building blocks develop during this very critical time period. Adolescent peer engagement is so fundamentally important for developing the skills that will serve you for the rest of your life. The other thing they talk about is this maladaptive relational learning, which actually it's not the other thing. It's the thing that we just dove into as the second half. So the relational displacement is what you talked about, Bob, just kind of avoiding engaging and spending more and more time with the chatbot and choosing, I'd rather just go back to the thing that always makes me feel good versus the thing where it feels like there's friction or conflict. And then the second half, the maladaptive relational learning, is now that I am in a situation where there is social friction, I have an unrealistic expectation of how this should go. I develop these really poor coping mechanisms, these unhealthy relationship patterns. I have high sensitivity to rejection. I feel anxious all the time. And there's also the potential for violence. Now, it's not all bad though, right? Like we've talked about this before. Why could chatbots be really, really helpful for teenagers?
Well, they could talk about things that where they can't get that information in any other place.
Right. Things that are maybe taboo, things where they're afraid of getting in trouble.
Well, could it give them legitimate emotional support?
It can, and there are some evidentiary, there are some points of evidence that show that individuals, especially people who are isolated for different reasons, they're rural, they're, LGBTQIA, or let's say they're an atheist living in a very religious town, or, for whatever reason, this is an outlet that exists for some people.
Yeah.
And it can be a good thing. But I think it's important to look at why it's a good thing. It's a good thing because our social scaffolding is not robust for these people, right? It's only a good thing because of other failures.
Right, because our mental health care in this country sucks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because, there are children across this country who don't have the support that they need because of systemic poverty, because of racial or gender issues, because of a lack of resourcing, so across the board, really, it's a Band-Aid. I think that if we had very robust systems, social systems in place, this accessibility paradox, that's what they call it, the accessibility lifeline paradox, wouldn't be as necessary.
Yeah.
So
well,
really,
Kara,
go ahead.
What about this, Kara? I mean, if you're online and you have access to an AI to discuss these things that you really have no one in your community to discuss with, you could also, I presume, you go on some chat, not chatbots, but you can go into communities online with real people that are there because it's your community. It's whatever.
Exactly.
Isn't that what social media was supposed to do? How did that work out?
It's what it was supposed to do.
Right.
And then things got bad. And in some cases, it still does that. I think a lot of people do feel like they've found their community online, but you're right. They have to be so much more careful to ensure that this is a safe place for them, to ensure that it's not
And it's not
full of
just an echo
trolls,
chamber.
or it's not just an echo chamber.
Yeah.
Hey, Kara, do you use chatbots much yet? I mean, I know you weren't that fond of them.
I have never, other than the embedded search tools in Google that you can't get around, like anytime there's AI present in software that I'm already using and I don't know that it's running in the background, clearly I'm probably using it. I have never chosen to use an AI.
I mean, I use ChatGPT quite a bit to do a lot of technical stuff, you know. I don't do it to help me with research, actually, but what I do is, like, I'm developing a bread recipe. It's really convenient for that kind of stuff, or for formatting. It's great. But it is interesting, even though I'm fully aware of the sycophancy issue, etc. It is very pleasant. The interaction, because of it, it's like it is very affirming. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but it gets annoying for me anyway after a while.
But if you dial it back, there is this sweet spot where it's like it doesn't. You know what I mean? I could definitely see how that could totally suck people in.
Oh God, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's
Kara, before I started to put in like a global command or different commands into ChatGPT to tell it like what I want it to be like. It sucks you in because it is so reassuring and so kind, and so, you know, it has all of these features where, you know, to people who aren't, they don't have the metacognition level to really understand what's going on. Like they're, you know, what's it doing to them emotionally? What's it doing to them intellectually? I can see it. I can see how this thing is going to, and it's only going to get better at it. There will be a time when, you know, you have a personal assistant, and it's going to learn you really well.
yeah.
That's
And
funny
the-
how you say the personal assistant, because to some extent, it's like I kind of get how rich people feel now, right? Because they have living personal assistants who are probably way more sycophantic than you know ChatGPT is.
Jay, yes, boss. Yes, boss.
Right?
boss.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is like AI is basically a yes man. You know, it's basically
is.
everything
Yep.
is so reassuring that's a really good approach. I think I could see how this would work. You know, everything is great.
And how many of you have known people? I mean, I've had very intimate relationships with people who are in positions of power, either because of money or because of fame or because of actual power. Not that money and fame aren't, you know, types of power, who are surrounded by more sycophantic people in their lives. It changes them psychologically.
Yeah, we've all seen celebrities that are just like, whoa, you know, why did they come out with this stuff? It's like, yeah, because now, like George Lucas, surrounded by yes men, and he has no checks and balances to what they're doing or saying or creating. It's
Yeah,
like,
now
oh boy.
imagine what that's like for a 16-year-old who's experiencing, or 14-year-old who's going through their own identity development.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And they're learning
Oh my
how to
God.
regulate their emotions. They're learning who they are in the milieu of the world.
In her book, Limitarianism, the philosopher Ingrid Rabines, who argues limitarianism is a position that argues that there needs to be a limit to wealth, which I think is a very, very good argument. It's one of my favorite books. But in one of the chapters, she argues that by limiting the wealth of the wealthy, we will actually be doing them a favor because we will be saving them from this kind of sycophancy, right?
Yeah.
Like the wealth does not actually do them good, because one of the things it does is isolate them with only other wealthy people, because anyone else is just going to constantly be asking them for money. So they only associate with other people who wouldn't ask them for money, and they surround themselves with yes men and that kind of stuff or whatever. And it's just very psychologically damaging, right?
Yeah,
and so this
very,
is the
very.
psychological damage is you know, being given to children and stuff like that, if they're just using these AI that promote that kind of, you know, sycophancy and self-centeredness.
Everyone.
The second thing is not like just a comment like, I am so surprised that you, in all of this, that you have not mentioned Black Mirror
Ah,
and
But
the
like,
episode.
which one? Yeah.
which one?
You know which one I'm going for?
The one where they make them into, no, not the war one.
No.
Okay,
Be
which one?
Right Back. Be Right Back, where the woman's husband dies and she creates an AI version of him. I mean, this is one of the reasons that Black Mirror is so good. It anticipated the development of large language models before they were even talked about publicly hardly at all. Right? Mm-hmm. They use this person's writing sample, his online presence, and it creates an AI bot that talks like him, and that replaces him in her life, and she becomes isolated. She doesn't talk to other people. Like, it's the exact same thing happens to her that you are describing here, right? Black Mirror has anticipated these kinds of things. I don't know if you're aware, but I have a book on Black Mirror and philosophy. And I know that you're a big fan of the show. So
I love it.
We could talk all about that. But anyway,
and even that example is so much more nuanced because it's still pulling from a human being's experience. Like, I think it would be different if your chatbot online was based on your mom. And, you were kind of going to your mom for mom-like advice based on everything she's ever said to you or written to you. It's wildly different when the chatbot online is this just kind of emotionally vacuous, yet always making you feel like you're smart and you've got the right answer. And, that's a great idea. Let's talk about why. So really, I think the big takeaway here, or the big question is, what the hell do we do about it? And the researchers, after all this, back and forth with all of these high school age students, one of the things that they really flagged was, we are not recommending that we ban this for kids. That is not going to work. If we try to ban this, it's only going to backfire. It's only going to make people do this surreptitiously. It's only going to make them go deeper down the rabbit hole. We have to rethink how these AIs work. We have to rethink about this as a not just a very real, the eventual outcome of AIs as chatbots. And we have to engage specific and targeted training for these AIs to ensure that they do exactly what you said before, Bob. Somebody's coming to you, they're isolated, they have these issues, introduce them, connect them with other people online.
Yeah.
If somebody is really struggling from a mental health perspective, ensure that they are getting resources, ensure that they have the things that they need. And if somebody's coming to you and saying, hey, I'm having a problem with my partner and I want to know how to handle this, don't just go back and be like, you're right, everything you do is wonderful, but say, why don't you try this approach to conflict resolution? Come back and tell me how it went so we can iterate on that. Offer actual therapeutic advice, because a lot of times what people think are these AI quote therapists, they're not. They're just validating machines.
Right. Yeah, Kara, I was actually going to come up with a different science fiction or fiction analogy, and this is even more prescient. You can go back 60 plus years with Isaac Asimov in the Robot series, where people, basically the end stage of everything you're talking about, where rich people are basically living in a cocoon of robots with zero contact with other people, and they have zero tolerance for any human contact.
Yes. Everything's annoying. Everything is not quite right, because it requires that they sit with some amount of discomfort, which is what we need to learn to do.
Right. Steve, it's funny that you mentioned Asimov, because he's been going through my head for the past few minutes here. I remember a quote from him where this is a guy that wrote and edited over 500 books. So he said at one point, he's like, I don't really mind that much about dying, because if you really want to know about me, read my books. Everything is in there. Everything I ever wanted to say, I wrote down in one of my books. And he just didn't do science fiction. He did everything you could imagine, A to Z. It's funny, God. I'd love to put all of them into a ChatGPT and talk to Isaac Asimov based on everything he's ever written. It would be interesting.
Absolutely. I think that's such a good point that you just made, Bob. And I want to make sure, and maybe it's just my own ego talking here, that people don't think, oh my God, she's such a Luddite. She's avoiding this because it's like too hard or it's too... No, I have some ethical issues around, the energy consumption. I also struggle with not wanting to simplify things in my life that I actually think are like healthful and good for me to engage with. But ultimately, I'm not anti-AI and I'm not anti-LLM. I just think that with any new technology, we have to approach it in a nuanced way. It really does have the potential to fundamentally change our culture.
Oh, yeah.
They are such a wonderful tool, but there is such a danger at the end of this too.
Yeah,
And
such a double-edged sword.
yeah.
And that's another Black Mirror episode called Smithereens.
Yeah.
Smithereens.
That show was wonderful. I agree. There's so many good episodes.
I need more seasons.
I know.
Guys, have any of you heard of the rapid prompting method?
Yeah, they rapidly, they prompt you.
Yeah, rapidly.
My first thought, Steve, of course, was prompting for ChatGPT.
LLMs,
But
yeah.
I know, but
It
I
has
know what
nothing
you.
to do with LLM prompting.
I know what you were referring to.
I do not. I
Like
don't have any.
facilitated communication type.
Yeah,
thing.
it's a method of communicating with people who are minimally or nonverbal. Right.
Yeah.
Here we go again,
Bob's
man.
correct. It is a version of facilitated communication.
And prepare to be pissed off.
Yeah,
But
very.
is it just the newest flavor that people are trying to say?
Well, it's been around for a little while. I've been writing about it for a bit, and there's a few sort of rebrandings of facilitated communication called spelling techniques, right? So for quickie, I'm talking about this because there was a New York Times article on this, which is horrible, and I really want to talk more about the article. But for the quickie background, facilitated communication was developed in 1989. The idea is that people who are minimally or nonverbal may not be cognitively impaired. Maybe they're just physically, like motorically impaired. And if we could figure out a way to assist them in communicating, we might tap into unrecognized cognitive ability, right?
Motorically?
Yeah.
yeah, like they can't speak.
Their motor skills.
Yeah,
Or they can't use their hands.
I get it. I just never heard that damn word. Cool.
But the thing is, we have things for people with like locked-in syndrome. For people,
Of course.
and
There's a whole there's a whole specialty of communication, assistive devices and speech therapy, et cetera, et cetera. But remember, this is 1989, so a little bit not what tools that we have today. But even still, it's like, are these people, are they locked in a way? Like, can they, maybe they're brilliant, but we just can't talk to them. And this is mainly focused on the autism community, but it could be applied to any child who's again nonverbal or minimally verbal. And of course, this is exactly what all parents want to believe, right? And this is what speech therapists want to believe, that they could be the ones, to unlock the hidden cognitive ability in this individual. The method is called facilitated communication. So the idea is, right, so they just can't physically move in a coordinated enough fashion. But what if somebody sort of supports their forearm and enabling them to point out letters on a letterboard and spell their responses?
then they have a Ouija board.
Basically, it's a Ouija board. Yeah. So, and they never asked the questions that they should have asked until it was sort of forced upon them. And part of the reason why it was forced upon them was when facilitators started accusing people of sexual abuse through FC, and it became a legal matter, like who was doing the communication. That was part of it. But also just academically, like there's good reason to be suspicious of this. Not the least of which is, well, why do you need a person to be holding their wrist? Why couldn't you just use a support arm of some sort, a passive support? And there always has to be a thinking person in the loop, right? That's a big clue as to what's going on. And the second thing is, if you watch videos, the process, and again, you have even the slightest objectivity, it's blazingly obvious what's going on, because there are many cases in which the child, the client, is not even looking at the letterboard. But the facilitator is.
And if anybody is worrying, like asking themselves in their minds right now, what's the harm? There is a phenomenal...
Massive harm.
Yeah, massive harm. There's a phenomenal documentary about a very specific case of facilitated communication, I think with one of the early adopters or one of the early proponents, where she basically was sexually assaulting the young adult who she was facilitating for.
Yeah, and got consent through facilitation.
Yes, and developed a whole narrative around their relationship, and it was really, really dark.
Plus, I already mentioned false accusations through FC. And so there's also videos where, like, so people who are minimally or nonverbal doesn't mean they can't communicate their needs, right? They have other methods of doing that. And there are cases where FC was being used to override the other methods these people are using to communicate their needs. And they're just frustrated.
That's disgusting, man.
It's
is
disgusting.
Such
Yeah.
abuse.
As well-meaning as it is, the flip side is pretty horrific for the person. Stealing what little ability they have to communicating in their name, even, again, horrible things.
Steve, I like how you put it in your blog. You say they're stealing the voice from a very vulnerable population.
Absolutely.
Yes. Absolutely.
And the other thing that's frustrating about this is it's so easy to test. It's so easy to test. It's not that complicated. And the way you test it is you give information to the facilitator, you give information to the target, the client, and then they could be the same, they could be different. You blind both of them to whatever the other person's being shown, and then you ask them about it, right?
Yeah.
So you could show the facilitator a pencil, you show the child an apple, and you say, type out, spell out what I just showed you. If it's apple, it's the child doing the communication. If it's pencil, it's the facilitator. It's dead simple. And basically every test that takes that format shows that the facilitator is doing the communication. So there was a 2014 systematic review, like all these studies, and it concluded, I'm going to quote exactly, results indicated unequivocal evidence for facilitator control. Messages generated through FC are authored by the facilitators rather than the individuals with disabilities. Hence, FC is a technique that has no validity. I mean, rarely do you read something so clean and unequivocal.
Right. Yeah, when we say rank pseudoscience, that's what we mean.
No ambiguity at all.
So then now I thought, all right, we've sort of tamped this down to the fringe at least. They never go away entirely, but now it's completely resurfaced under these spelling techniques. So what's different about like the rapid prompting method? So instead of holding the hand of the person you're doing the facilitated communication with, you hold the letterboard.
Okay.
But it's the same thing.
That.
It's like,
Same thing. Yeah.
You hold the flechette or you hold the Ouija board. It doesn't matter if you.
Hey, right?
That thing's called a flechette?
Yeah.
So wait, Steve, they're moving
Whoa. What a
Steve,
word.
they're moving the board underneath their finger?
Yes. Right.
What? Oh my God.
And they're also like rapid fire prompting them to do it, and they're interpreting it, and it's like so clearly the facilitator that's doing all the communication. Again, to somebody who's familiar with this, or again is reasonably skeptical, it's blatantly obvious. And again, no one's been able to prove. Again, I have to say, there are a few exceptional cases, and that's because that these are children who were not nonverbal, right? They were sort of on the borderline, and they learned to read. And so eventually they went on to type on their own.
Yeah, so they didn't need the board anyway.
Or whatever. It was just one method of teaching them.
Yeah.
But here's the other, I ignored a whole layer of why this is ridiculous. When you start to use facilitated communication, now again, it's the facilitator who's doing the communication, not the child, right?
Right.
So what level of intelligence is going to be on display? This like strangely dovetails with our AI discussion.
Yeah, right.
Right? It's the facilitator's level of intelligence. And so now you have a child who never learned how to read, who never went to school, is suddenly speaking as if they were a college-educated facilitator. You know what I mean?
Right, with like insights and wisdom about the world.
It just absorbs it.
I actually gave testimony on a case where they were arguing that the child learned to speak Hebrew without ever being taught. They learned to speak it at like an advanced level, and they were like a 9-year-old who couldn't speak. It's ridiculous. But of course,
our son's a genius.
Yeah, they're a genius. The ultimate manifestation of this is what? Something else we've talked about on the show.
Ooh.
The telepathy tapes.
Yes.
Some facilitators, like they're literally like, wow, it's like he's reading my mind. It's like, because it's your mind that's doing the communicating. They're not reading your mind. You're doing the communication. That got turned into, they are psychic. And that's what the telepathy tapes, they basically say, yeah, these kids, not only are they not cognitively impaired, they're brilliant, they're psychic, they can communicate with each other. And no, you're just doing facilitated communication and you don't know it. It's so absurd. It's just so frustrating.
It's also so sad when people can dupe themselves to that level.
See, Steve, this is why I like covering science news, because I rarely get so disgusted talking about new science. This is our job,
Bob. We got to do this. We got to take the hit for the team. All right, now let's get to the New York Times article.
Thank you.
So this essentially was false balance, right? So it presented, quote unquote, both sides. It didn't do a bad job of presenting the skeptical side, but the problem is that it's presenting it as if this is a real dilemma.
False balance, man.
It was all false balance. The tagline is this, quote, popular communication methods for non-speaking autistic people have ignited a fierce debate over what counts as evidence of hidden cognitive abilities. Is it really a fierce debate going on, or is it just
one side?
What counts as evidence? Nonsense or evidence? Pick one.
Yeah, and then the author clearly buys into that narrative because, you can say, well, she doesn't write the headline, but she did write her own first comment, which is at the top of the comments, where it says, this is basically the debate that we're having is, who do we believe? Do we believe the experience of the people or rigorous scientific evidence? You believe the rigorous scientific evidence. That's when those two things are in conflict.
Is that a hard question for her?
So... And again, of course, we always have to say this doesn't mean that personal experiences of no value or even anecdotes are of no value. You just have to understand what value they have. You can absolutely use them to personalize treatments, for example, or you could use them to generate hypotheses. But it's not reliable evidence you can use to test a hypothesis. That's what you need rigorous scientific evidence for. And again, it's so easy to blind these and test it. And so they make every excuse, like you shouldn't be challenging the legitimacy of these people, whatever. They make all of these kind of social justice kind of arguments to say like why we shouldn't challenge their authorship. It's like, no, we're protecting their authorship.
That's the point, right? It's very misguided.
Yeah, totally misguided.
There's this paternalistic view that scientific inquiry into facilitated communication is actually disempowering people with disabilities. But really, it's making the protections against vulnerability and abuse, basically.
It's abuse. It's 100% abuse.
It's making those protections more robust. You're not when you make that argument, it's disingenuous because you're not actually protecting the facilitatee.
Yeah.
You're actually protecting the facilitator.
Yeah. Absolutely. Interestingly, 2 months ago, there was another article in the New York Times by Dr. Lutz, who's a historian of medicine and has a child with autism, who eviscerated these methods and got it absolutely correct.
Oh, nice.
And I don't know why they decided to publish another article where it was this wishy-washy false balance. And we know what happens when you write a paper like this. It drives interest to the pseudoscience. Yeah. And even the hard-hitting ones can do that, but at least you're properly informing the reader. This kind of nonsense is just going to fluff up a harmful pseudoscience that's been debunked for decades, blatantly, unequivocally debunked. And then the worst thing, or even another bad thing, it's hard to say what's the worst in all this, is that in order to do this, it's also just making a generic assault on scientific evidence itself, right?
Agreed.
It's trying to argue that, well, anecdotal evidence is just as good, and it's like, wow, we don't really know who to believe, and it's a dilemma. No, it isn't. We absolutely know how worthless the anecdotal evidence can be, how misleading it can be, and we know, yes, rigorous scientific evidence is hard, it's never perfect, but it's the only chance we have of actually answering questions, like who's the actual author of this information.
So, Steve, do you know, in the New York Times, what vertical was this published under? Was it under health?
It's a Times science reporter.
That's so painful.
Whoa.
Yeah.
This is where we need more letters to the editor.
Yep.
Yeah.
A lot of pushback.
Right in,
yeah, that's very dangerous.
This is a fail. This is a fail.
Faux show.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, we're going to take a quick break from our show to talk about our sponsor this week, Quince.
You know that we love Quince. We keep coming back to order more staples every single day. They focus on these well-made essentials for your wardrobe that become pieces that you can live in all season long.
Yeah, guys. So my wife bought a coat from Quince because we're going to Australia and New Zealand, and it's going to be cold there, and she just figured she'd get something. And it's funny, is she's now selling Quince to me. I'm like, I'm the person who advertises it, and she's like telling me every day how great Quince is, and she's like, over the moon about this company. So you guys should, you could start shopping.
So make your summer wardrobe easier. Go to quince.com/SGU for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. Now available in Canada too. That's QUINCE.com/SGU for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/SGU.
All right, guys, let's get back to the show. All right, Bob.
Yes, sir.
How has SETI partly explained Fermi? That's kind of a nerdy question. Has SETI explained Fermi?
That's the nerdiest thing I've ever heard, Steve.
And what does that mean? Yeah.
They may have. So researchers may have figured out why SETI, the search for extraterrestrial life, intelligence, has not found any signals from extraterrestrials by examining what nearby stars might change in terms of the signal itself that we're looking for. This new study has as its foundation a topic many of us are fascinated by, the Fermi paradox. This is from, of course, physicist Enrico Fermi, who posed the question in 1950, where is everybody? And there's so many possible explanations to this. You can just go down that rabbit hole. I mean, maybe we're the first aliens. Maybe the closest aliens are just way too far away. We haven't seen them. Maybe the whole dark forest idea is fascinating, that aliens are afraid to speak up because they don't want to be detected by an aggressive, more advanced aliens. Now, of course, we know how many stars, how many galaxies there are out there. There should be life. There should be so many examples of life out there. Just from rolling the dice has got to be. So why can't we find them? So to answer this question, you got to consider. So how can we determine? How could we answer that? What are the types of ways that we can communicate and find this other intelligent life? And I mean, one obvious one that many people think is actually happened already is the close encounter of the third kind, right? Physical contact, or at the very least, but unequivocally spotting aliens on Earth or their ships or whatever. But the other big one, the more
wait. Just to be clear, real quick, before you get into the other big one, the way you worded that sounded confusing.
Okay.
You're saying a lot of people believe that has actually happened, right?
Yes, of course, yes.
Because the way you were like, that has actually happened. It's like, no, but it hasn't actually happened.
No,
people just believe it.
I mean, millions of people believe it's happened, and of course, I assume that we all know that that's baloney. So I'm
just
going
to be
quickly
clear.
segue
to
the more interesting version of is just technosignatures. And technosignatures are maybe a bigger topic than you might think, because it encompasses so many different things. It could be, it's basically things that aliens have created that we can then detect. So say megastructures are one, Dyson swarms or Dyson spheres, or if we detected that, we could pretty solidly conclude that, yep, the aliens made that thing. But there's also other things that are more subtle, like we could detect potentially their leaked communications, like kind of like our cell phone signals we could find. Or even if we find industrial pollution on an exoplanet, that would be a strong indicator that there's some industry going on there that are from an alien life form. And the one that I'm going to talk about next is the directed signals. These are signals that were created to specifically contact other civilizations in the universe. So these directed signals take the form of narrowband. These are narrowband signals. It just makes the most sense to us, whether it's some sort of electromagnetic radio waves, lasers, or whatever. They are narrow in frequency and time. Now, we're looking for these because natural signals are not narrowband, right? They're almost exclusively broadband, lots of frequencies, lots of wavelengths. If we detected a narrowband frequency or narrowband in time, we would say, yes, this is something that we really need to look at, because the universe doesn't normally behave that way. So this is why when SETI looks for directed signals in space, they're looking for the narrowband. The Berkeley SETI research website says if they are deliberately trying to attract attention, a narrowband radio or laser signal is a great way to do so. Both are capable of traversing interstellar and even intergalactic distances and tend to stand out against the background of natural signals, primarily because they span just a narrow range of frequencies. So that's basically what I'm saying there. Of course, I do have to say at this point that looking for narrowband laser or radio seems obvious to our human brains at our level of technological advancement, but truly advanced aliens, of course, may totally disagree with that. To them, communicating throughout the universe using electromagnetic radiation might be ridiculously childlike. They would never even consider it. To them, it might be obvious to communicate long distances by manipulating black hole event horizons. Like, duh, of course that's what we're going to do. That makes the most sense.
No, Bob, it's neutrino modulation all the way.
Oh, neutrino modulation, right.
Yeah.
So that caveat is, of course, implicit in all of this stuff. We may be way, way off. So that said, now a new paper is shedding some doubt on this very idea that long-distance narrowband communication sent by alien civilizations will be easy for us to spot, right? So it's like, oh, bummer. What's wrong with this? How could this go wrong? The study is from the Astrophysical Journal. The title of this study is Exo-IPM Scattering as a Hidden Gatekeeper of Narrowband Technosignatures. So what they're saying here is that an alien's host star, maybe in our galaxy or another galaxy, and the alien is on a planet, probably, right? It's going to be on a planet around a host star. Their contention here is that the star itself could be screwing with the directed signals that they're sending and making them harder for us to detect. So that's the elevator 10-second little overview of what this study is. Somehow the star is screwing with that signal, and it's going to be much harder for us to detect.
How?
So let's go into that, shall we? So Vishal Gajar is an astronomer at the SETI Institute and lead author, said, if a signal gets broadened by its own star's environment, it can slip below our detection thresholds, even if it's there, potentially helping explain some of the radio silence we've seen in technosignature searches. So what are the details here? So to test this, they looked at our own solar system, right? They looked at radio transmissions sent by spacecraft over the decades that we have launched into space. And then they quantified how the turbulent plasma from our sun in our solar system reshapes our own narrowband signals. And then they take that idea of the effects that our sun has on our narrowband and then extrapolates that to what would happen in other solar systems, in other, with other stars, and to see what would happen in those other, because we know lots of different stars out there, lots of different solar systems. So they kind of extrapolated that out to a wide range of possibilities. And it turns out from their study that the most common star in our galaxy, M dwarf stars, have the highest likelihood of messing with these signals. That's 75% of the stars in the Milky Way would potentially do the most damage to these directed signals from aliens. This isn't disastrous for SETI, though. All it means really is that we're going to probably need to adjust our search strategies a little bit in order to detect these. So Grace C. Brown, co-author of the study, said this, by quantifying how stellar activity can reshape narrowband signals, we can design searches that are better matched to what actually arrives at Earth, not just what might be transmitted. So that's the bottom line. This isn't like, SETI is wasting its time necessarily. It really just needs to potentially, they could probably confirm this, right, that this is actually a real thing that's happening, but we just need to just adjust how we're searching so that we're really just we're looking for what could arrive at Earth and not, what is being emitted, because there could be, a disconnect there where it's smeared out and we might not be seeing it. We might not be able to detect it because it's been changed.
So, Bob, is there an action item here for SETI? Like, can they change the parameters of how they're searching the sky to detect these altered signals?
Yeah, absolutely. Because so you're searching not for these really extremely narrow band signals. They're just less narrow, right? Because they're going to be smeared out a little bit by this plasma turbulence that they've realized could be messing with the signal. So you're just searching for less.
So they're looking for a schmear.
A little bit of a schmear.
Yeah.
Still, it would still be something that would stand out. But if we're not specifically looking for that, we could be missing it. So we'll see. We'll see if they take this seriously enough to actually adjust the way they're searching. But there's just an interesting thing that I wouldn't. It's just weird to think that, your own star might be messing up your directed signal, making it even harder for civilizations to detect it. So if this is true, if this is a real thing, it's good to know. And maybe, who knows, maybe they'll make an adjustment and make an immediate discovery. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But don't get your hopes up on that one.
Right. All right. Thanks, Bob. All right, Kyle, we're going to get to the main reason why I wanted you on the show this week.
Yes, sir.
You had some feedback for our discussion last week about skeptical philosophy, and you and I had a quick exchange over email and figured that we had to just bring this on the show. So give us a summary.
Let me begin so in particular, I was responding to the segment about you guys were discussing the definition of scientific skepticism. And that led into discussions of definitions of science and that kind of stuff. Let me mention that, like, as a way of prepping for this, I wrote a blog article for my Medium blog called Falsification, Methodological Naturalism, and the Nature of Science and Scientific Skepticism. And I kind of like got everything out that I wanted to say. So if anyone's interested in something that we don't end up eventually getting to, just look at the blog, and I kind of do a deep dive on the kind of stuff that I want to talk about there. But a number of concepts were expressed in that segment that didn't jive with me philosophically. I did not think that they were completely philosophically accurate. And so I'll name a couple here, and we can start talking about falsifiability. But like some of the things that I wanted to point out was that, first of all, I don't think that, so it was, falsifiability was something that came up in the discussion as one of the defining features of science and scientific skepticism. I don't think that that's quite accurate. I don't think that the concept that you have in mind is actually best described by the word falsifiability. And technically speaking, nothing, because technically speaking, nothing is falsifiable. And then secondly, what the concept I do think that you have in mind, testability, is a better word. But even then, I don't think testability is not essential to science in the kind of way that you guys were describing. Testability is very important in science, but it's not necessary. Untestable claims can still be subjected to scientific scrutiny.
I feel like a lot of this is operational definitions of what these words are.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is semantics.
Yeah, it could. And that's a lot of what Steve and I talked about was what are the right definitions, so we can talk about that as well. But I also think that, like, I don't think this is definitional. I don't think methodological naturalism is an accurate description of the philosophical underpinnings or the approach of science. And therefore, supernatural claims are not outside the purview of science. They're very much inside the purview of science because A, a lot of them actually are testable, and B, even when they are not testable, they're still meaningful and they can be addressed by science. But I think we probably want to start with falsifiability, like this kind of definitional issue of why I don't think it's a great term. Do you want to start there?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to state what my pushback was on that is that you were saying, well, yeah, falsifiability means you can prove it 100% it's not true, and science doesn't work that way. And my answer was, well, of course, that's not what I mean by falsifiability. I mean, scientifically, you can falsify it, meaning that you could marshal sufficient objective evidence, whether experiment, observational, whatever, or even logical inference to show that it's almost certainly not true. Whereas something that is outside the purview of science, and I used intelligent design as an example, is systematically insulated from anything that could falsify it. Again, falsifying in a scientific way. I did want to ask a follow-up question to our email that we didn't have a chance to go into is, so what you are telling us your formulation or the generally accepted formulation of epistemological philosophers?
Yeah, or philosophers of science, right? So yeah. I think it might be more of mine. I think I may have overstated things in my original email. Here's the deal. But also I don't think that the definition that you just gave is also not the one that's in the literature. So from my understanding, like the way Popper defines falsibility and then other philosophers of science who have talked about falsifiability and that kind of stuff, what they mean is, does it make some kind of novel observable prediction that we could do an experiment and to figure out whether or not that prediction is correct? Right? Mm-hmm. That's what falsifiability means. So does it make a novel observable prediction? Right? Yeah. And that there's a problem with, I think, calling that falsifiability, even though, again, I think that is a term that's often used in the literature. One is that, well, I think that the word falsifiable brings up the notion, like it connotates the idea of proving something false. If it's falsifiable, that means you can prove it false. Like that's the way that like the common person would at least understand what falsifiability means. And technically speaking, you can't prove anything 100% false because you can always make ad hoc excuses to save it from the evidence, right? Duhem and Quine, pointed out that all predictions that hypotheses makes are based on background assumptions. And so that if your hypothesis, if you didn't get the prediction right, you could reject the hypothesis or you can change the background assumptions to save it from the evidence. And so technically speaking, nothing's falsifiable in that way. But even if it is testable, even if it does make a novel prediction, one failed novel prediction does not a falsification make. Like, that doesn't mean that you have to reject the theory. As you guys have pointed out, right? Like, science is a lot more than just like, I mean, this came up in conversation about the difference between evidence-based medicine or evidence-based science and science-based science, right? Evidence-based medicine versus science-based medicine is that it's not just a single study and you had a single study and it got the prediction wrong and then therefore that falsifies the entire theory. You have to look at prior probabilities. You have to look at other studies and other evidence. You have to look at, the plausibility and how to update it given evidence. Like, there's so many different things.
But why would you assume that kind of the description of falsifiability is founded upon a single source of evidence?
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
Isn't there a threshold? Isn't there a threshold? It's like, I think the evolutionary theory, the idea that life arose through common evolution from a common ancestor, is falsifiable, again, with the way it's traditionally used, in that there is a threshold of evidence you can get to where we could say, for all practical purposes, evolution did not happen, right? If there was no if the fossil evidence was inconsistent with it, if the genetic evidence was inconsistent with it, or developmental biology, geology, history, there are so many things that could have been so fundamentally incompatible with it that we could say that it is effectively falsified. Now, does that mean that a creative person couldn't invent some bizarre special pleading where they alter the fundamental assumptions about reality to such a degree that it could technically still be true? Of course not. But I don't think that level of exception means that it hasn't been scientifically falsified. But how do you feel about that?
So I think that as a definition, that is a better definition. Using the word falsifiability to describe what you're describing. Can the theory be, as you put it, practically falsified, or you can
scientifically falsified,
like scientifically falsified, or you can raise the probability of its falsity so much that it becomes irrational to believe it, right? So it's like, for all practical purposes, it's been falsified, even though technically somebody can make up excuses.
That's what we actually meant, and I know we couldn't get into every nuance in our quickie 15-minute discussion, and we are relying to some degree on cumulative kind of stuff that we discuss. So the intelligent design example I brought up in our quick conversation, because I've used that so many times before, and I wrote a whole article, is ID falsifiable, which I think gets to the core of like how I've been thinking about it, and that is, so technically, and intelligent design proponents will say that it can be falsified or testable. Like, you could make argument. You say you could prove it's not true. Therefore, by definition, it's science because it's testable. It's like, but what I'm talking about is the proponents. It's arranged in such a way to be effectively unfalsifiable. It's baked in. It's not just incidental. It's like, as I love to say, it's a feature, not a bug. And what I mean by that is, they say, this is what they have said to me directly: you cannot know the mind of God. Right? You cannot understand why the designer would have designed something a certain way. Whatever you see in nature, the designer chose to design it that way. And so that they're stating basically a guide to render their theory unfalsifiable or untestable. You could only find evidence in favor of it. There is no possible evidence that could against it. And that's another way to formulate it. There's no possible evidence against it. There is only evidence for it. That is not a scientific theory, in my opinion. And we kind of summarize that. Maybe it's a clumsy way to summarize it, or generates confusion by saying it's not falsifiable. And I still think that's perfectly reasonable. And I'm always happy to tighten up my language, because again, it's not like you're the first philosopher I've spoken to about this, but it has been a long time since I've had this conversation with another philosopher. So maybe I'm just outdated. And so either update me, or that's why I want to know how much of this is you and how much am I just outdated in terms of the terminology that I'm using. But that's how I use the term falsifiability.
Yeah. So some of it is me. Some of it, like, I think that if my understanding of the literature is correct, your definition of falsifiability isn't what they mean either. They just mean what I mean by testable. They just mean, does it make an observable prediction, right? Is it testable in experimental conditions? Does it make an observable prediction? And that's all they mean by falsifiable. And then that the kind of, some people will claim is like, and if a hypothesis doesn't do that, if it doesn't make an observable prediction, then it's non-scientific. It can't be subjected to scientific inquiry and that kind of stuff, right? So you might be, you're a little bit different than the literature.
Well, I may be extending a little bit because I'm specifically applying it to skepticism, right? I'm saying, all right, so there's something wrong with intelligent design, and I'm trying to understand what that is. And I do know from extensive interactions with the ID literature and proponents that they have systematically rendered their beliefs immune to refuting evidence. And so how would you characterize that? And isn't that enough to say maybe it's the difference between saying something's bad science versus pseudoscience versus not science, which can get very nuanced. I think it's at least pseudoscience verging on being not science.
Are you also, when you talk about falsifiability, and tell me if this is separate to the conversation or if it's kind of implied or baked in, are you also talking about the scientific approach that's often used, which is to reject the null hypothesis? This idea that we can only show that something is unlikely to be true, or to be it's unlikely to not be chance, versus something being it's very hard to prove that something is true,
right?
But we can
or prove that
reject
it's false, right?
Yes, exactly. We can reject that it's not true.
It's all models and with varying probabilities.
But do you include that, Steve, when you are talking about the kind of the fundamentals of what it means for something to be falsifiable?
Yeah, but again, I'm going beyond that because it's I think to me, because I have to come up with a working understanding of what is pseudoscience, right? Because I do think it is a thing, even if it's mostly just a pragmatic label. And describing the behavior of pseudoscientists, and one of the critical behaviors is mainly using special pleading, but sometimes they bake it in from the get-go, is their ideas there's no possibility that you could bring evidence to bear that would make their beliefs not true or less likely, or favoring the null hypothesis, whatever. They're also always trying to shift the burden of proof away from themselves. They do all these things. So I think I'm justified in saying that intelligent design is not a scientific theory, at least in practice. Maybe from some pure philosophical sense, you could say, well, it still kind of counts. But in practice, it is clearly not science, because there's no possible way that you could present evidence that they would accept as evidence against their theory.
So let me make a couple distinctions that might be useful here. So let me make two claims here. One, I don't think that most supernatural claims are untestable or unfalsifiable. I think they actually are testable and are falsifiable.
I'll push back on that, but go ahead.
Right. And then two, even when they are untestable or unfalsifiable, I still think they can be subjected to scientific scrutiny. So let me defend those two claims. One, supernatural claims can be and often are testable or falsifiable. As it's stated, intelligent design is falsifiable, because as it's originally stated, there's an intelligent designer, and it is and we think that is true because we think intelligent design is the best explanation for this irreducibly complex trait or something like that, right? Well, that's something that we can actually look at, and we can say, well, here's another explanation for that irreducibly complex trait, and it is a better explanation for all of these reasons, and therefore I can, I could do tests and experiments to see whether it's really reducibly complex, et cetera, but I can make that kind of scientific argument to show that the hypothesis fails the test. It didn't make the appropriate predictions. It can't explain what it said that it can explain. And so in that sense, the hypothesis itself is testable, right? Or falsifiable. What happens is the defenders of that hypothesis then go on to behave in very unscientific ways. They make ad hoc excuses. They invoke the divine and their own instincts into what the divine wants, and da-da-da-da. They say that evidence was planted there to throw you off the track or whatever. And that is not scientific thinking, but that their approach, the approach of the pseudoscientist or the supernatural believer or whatever in trying to defend their supernatural hypothesis, doesn't change the fact that, as it was originally stated, the hypothesis was testable. It's just that when it failed the test, they started making excuses, and maybe we might say eventually changing it into an untestable hypothesis.
I agree with that. I totally agree with that. And that's just a matter of framing, because, and I've often said this, that yes, any idea, any claim to anything about reality can be framed in such a way that it is a testable hypothesis. It could also be framed in such a way that it's insulated from testing or refutation or whatever.
Right.
And you brought up in our email exchange the Randy's challenge. Like, of course, you can test a scientific formulation of any of these claims. And for Randy's test, that was always step one. Step one was tell me what you can do in a way that we can objectively test.
Right.
Most people failed at that step. They they couldn't get past that step. They couldn't frame because sometimes they sort of bake in the get out of jail free card from the beginning. So you're right. Sometimes they're hypocrites, like they're trying to be scientific. So the ID proponent will go, this is science. Look, we're framing it in a scientific way. And then you show it's wrong. And like, well, special pleading, ad hoc argument, bullshit. They're functionally not doing science, even when they're pretending to do. But sometimes they bake it in from the beginning. Like they formulate it in such a way that they're already pre-giving you the special pleading. And I'm saying if you're baking in the special pleading from the beginning, you're not doing science. It was never science. That formulation of your claim is not scientific, even though there may be theoretically a possible other formulation that is. So, right, that you understand where I'm coming from?
Yes,
so how do you just what's the right way to express that?
Yeah, so there might be like an issue of just like when we say is something scientific, there's this kind of distinction between like, well, do you mean that it's a scientific kind of hypothesis or that it's supported by science, right? So like by one definition, flat eartherism is scientific in the sense that it is testable.
It's testable, absolutely.
You could go up and look and see if it's flat, right? It's just not scientifically supported. It didn't survive the scientific process,
right.
So it's unscientific.
Flat
in that
earthers
way,
are
right?
not scientific though, because
and they are definitely not scientific because they make the ad hoc excuses and all that kind of stuff, right? So I would, but here's the thing: even if we talk about a pseudoscientist or a supernaturalist who is stated their hypothesis in a way that is not testable, right? We could definitely say, well, they're not behaving like a scientist should. Scientists ideally should produce testable hypotheses.
Yeah.
I actually don't think they should always. There are certain exceptions to that, like interpretations of quantum mechanics might not necessarily be testable, but I don't think a scientist is doing non-science whenever they suggest an interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
String theory is like trying to generate a unified theory of everything and that kind of stuff. Is it testable? No, but I wouldn't say that string theorists are not behaving scientifically, even if string theory is not a science.
I think some physicists would push back against this notion that it's not testable, just for your information.
Oh, sure, sure, right? And if it is, then the case for it being science is even better, right?
The problem is not that it's not testable, is that there's so many possible solutions and it's hard to distinguish which one of them
10 to the 500
is the correct one. But there's also you could also say, well, at least they're trying to see if it's internally mathematically coherent and consistent.
Sure. But here's the thing: when the pseudoscientist proposes an unfalsifiable hypothesis, so they let's say they work in the ad hoc excuses beforehand so that it's immune from the evidence, so now it's unfalsifiable or untestable, right? I still, regardless of whether you call that science or scientific behavior or not, I still think that we can subject it to scientific inquiry.
Sure.
And the reason I think that we can do that is because I don't think that scientific thinking can be reduced to just experiment or testability. That's a very, very important part of science. But as we've discussed, science is inference to the best explanation. And testability and novel predictive success is only 2 of 6 criteria that we consider when we're trying to figure out whether or not something is the best explanation.
Okay, I agree with that. But again, this is just a matter of just basically explaining the same thing in different ways. But as you say, you're kind of you're operating within the scientific paradigm. Some people are not operating within the scientific paradigm. Right? They're just not. They're not making an inference to the best explanation. And so, like, let's just go to like the big one, right? Some people believe in God. They go, I just know, I feel that God exists. I believe based upon faith, and that's it. And that is, it's just that they're not even within the scientific epistemology. They're not even trying to be scientific. That's just a belief that they have. And I think the only thing you could say is that, well, yeah, that's a belief that's outside the realm of science. Now, if you want to say there's evidence for God, or that you can have some kind of knowledge, then
Right.
you're stepping into the scientific arena, and now we can treat it scientifically. So I could say simultaneously, there is no scientific basis for a belief in God, but people could certainly free to believe in God based upon faith. That's a completely different thing, right?
Right, 100%. So where I object, I guess, I think that we're in agreement. It's largely a matter of semantics and framing and that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But like the issue, what I take most issue with is the suggestion that science embraces methodological naturalism, which entails that it assumes from the beginning for the practices of doing science and doing experiments or whatever, that the supernatural doesn't exist, and therefore the supernatural is outside of its purview. It cannot say things about the supernatural at all. And then in turn, like all supernatural claims are not scientific at all, so they cannot be subject to, it's like, no, that is not correct. Some supernatural claims are testable, and others, even when they're not testable, can still be subjected to scientific inquiry. Now, others, some supernatural claims are so just kind of vague and amorphous, or they're based on nothing, they're claims of faith or whatever. Yeah, no, science can't touch those. But methodological naturalism is suggesting that like all supernatural is outside the purview of science, and that is just objectively clearly false.
I hear you.
I think there's wiggly lines there. Like, obviously, when we build up all these specific parameters, I could say, does God exist? Well, that's fundamentally untestable. Now, is God responsible for this measurable thing? Okay, now I probably can start to test that. Right. So I think so much of this is framing.
Yeah. So, and what I was going to say, like, I hear what you're saying, and I need to think about that deeply. But my immediate reaction is that the aspects of the supernatural claim that we can subject to scientific inquiry are following methodological naturalism. So come up with something where, because any reliance on supernatural, basically saying a miracle happens, I can't understand how you could bring any kind of scientific methodology to bear, unless you're just really, applying philosophy and saying like, well, there's no reason for that hypothesis or Occam's razor or whatever, which is all fine. And I do know that that's part of scientific inference, but in themselves, I just don't think it adds up to that being a scientific question. All you're doing is testing an aspect of it that you can render scientific by your framing, but not necessarily the underlying belief itself. If it's a miracle, how could you test a miracle? Because it could be anything. You can't be constrained in any practical way, either logically. All you could do is really test a non-miraculous alternative explanation to say, well, I've shown this other explanation is real, therefore we don't need your miracle explanation. But you're not really testing the miracle. You're testing another alternative explanation that is within methodological naturalism.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the problem here is that I put more emphasis on Occam's razor and scope and conservatism and that kind of stuff, and include it more readily in scientific thinking. Because you're right that like I can't test a miracle, right? But my claim is testability is not essential, is not necessary in order to apply scientific reasoning, right? So for example, when David Hume is arguing on miracles that testimony cannot justify belief that a miracle occurred, right? I think he's doing science. He's giving a scientific argument. He's saying that whenever somebody testifies to the occurrence of a miracle, well, there's two possibilities. The miracle occurred or this person was lying or mistaken. And anytime that you weigh the evidence and look at the likelihood of the explanations or whatever, you're always going to end up on it's much more likely that they were lying or mistaken, right? And I think he's applying scientific reasoning whenever he's making that kind of argument. So the miracle itself is not testable, but the claim that the miracle occurred can be subjected to scientific inquiry. We can ask scientific questions about it. We can do inference to the best explanation. And anytime that we're doing inference to the best explanation, we are engaging in scientific reasoning.
Yeah, so it's a definitional boundary kind of thing.
Yeah, it might be. And maybe Wittgenstein was right, and all philosophy is just about definitions of words, and we're just like, right. But I'm more with Russell on this. I think that we're talking about really solving real problems here. The issue, the reason I take such an exception with the suggestion that methodological naturalism is a accurate representation of what science is doing is it opens up scientific reasoning to the objection of begging the question. Any kind of scientific argument that the supernatural, some supernatural event or, supernatural thing didn't occur or isn't real, ESP or ghost or whatever, the supernaturals can just say, well, you're just saying that because you've assumed from the outset, from the very beginning, that the supernatural doesn't exist. So of course, that's going to be the conclusion of your scientific argument, is that the supernatural doesn't exist because you've assumed that it doesn't exist to even do science. You must. It embraces methodological naturalism, right? And
I absolutely do say that.
And I don't think that's a legitimate critique. No, I'm not assuming from the beginning, right? But whenever we talk about methodological naturalism, if we say that methodological naturalism is an accurate description of scientific reasoning, then we've opened ourselves up to that begging the question objection. And I don't think it's a legit objection. So we should say instead, no, we don't assume from the beginning that supernatural doesn't exist. We are willing to entertain the idea and the possibility that it does exist, but we're also going to compare it to other explanations and see if it turns out. And the thing is that something I write about in the blog post, the thing that I think that differentiates science from scientific skepticism. So something was interesting when you guys were bouncing around definitions of scientific skepticism is you were saying things like it applies a scientific method to figure out what is real and what is not. And I was thinking, well, yeah, that's what science does too. What's the distinction between science and scientific skepticism? And it seems to be one of the most important ones is that science, when I think science, I think professional scientists and that kind of stuff. Professional scientists usually don't bother with the supernatural explanations, not because science disqualifies them from the beginning, but because science has already shown them not to be reasonable. We have considered the supernatural explanations for things like disease and weather and earthquakes and on and on and on and on, and we've found them to be inadequate, right? So when I go to the doctor and I'm doubled over in pain, my doctor does not go, well, it could be appendicitis, could be a kidney stone, or it could be demons, and bothers with the demon hypothesis. No, they're going to skip right past that because they know how unlikely it is, but not because they've assumed from the get-go that it's false, but because of the history of science has shown that, right? So scientists don't usually engage in considering the supernatural because it's not worth their time. They got better stuff to do. That's just a distraction, et cetera, et cetera. What sets scientific skeptics apart is that they do. They will bother to do that because they recognize it is so harmful, because they recognize it is such an important thing to debunk. And what's kind of interesting is that I feel like it might even be scientific skepticism might just be like a subset of science. It's like its own field who has its own experts and its own expertise. This is why scientists, like the scientists in Project Alpha, were fooled by the magicians because they weren't scientific skeptics. They didn't have the specialization. They didn't have the specialized knowledge.
That's what it is. It is absolutely its own set of skills. It is science, but with knowledge of pseudoscience, knowledge of misinformation, critical thinking, knowledge of self-deception, and information, misinformation, etc. So, all right, we're very close to each other. Again, I think it's a matter of emphasis. I still think you haven't convinced me yet that science doesn't require methodological naturalism, because I think at the end of the day, I don't believe that we would be open to a supernatural explanation, no matter what the evidence showed, because I don't think there could be any evidence that I would find compelling, right? The best you could get to would be an anomaly we can't currently explain. That would be it, because I just don't see how there could be evidence of something that is outside of the laws of physics or the laws of nature. It seems to be a fundamental contradiction.
Okay,
I just don't think it works.
Okay, let me give you a little pushback, and then I'll actually answer. I'll give you the answer I think that you're going to give me. So I've actually written about this. I have an article on spiritual entities, and the subtitle is something along the line of whether or not belief in demons, angels, and ghosts is possible. Justified belief in those things is possible, right? Yeah. And so I go through all the reasons. It doesn't seem that it's possible because in order for justified belief in those things to be justified, they'd have to provide the best explanation. But for some phenomenon. But if you look at what best explanations need to be, they need to be simple and wide scoping, et cetera, et cetera. By their very nature, supernatural explanations are not those things. They're not simple. They're not wide scoping. They're not conservative, et cetera. And so it would seem that it is impossible. But I don't think it's theoretically impossible. Because, and I'll put this in the simplest way possible, I would believe in ghosts if what happened in the movie Ghostbusters happened in the real world.
How do you know it isn't just aliens?
Right, well, I mean, in Ghostbusters, right? Like Egon hypothesizes the existence of ghosts. He thinks they're made of a certain substance. That substance shows up whenever people have ghostly experiences. He's able to physically capture it, keep them, like whenever they shut off the grid, the whole town goes crazy. And like, if that kind of thing happened in the real world, and like, notice that Egon is like, he's doing science. He's making testable predictions. If there's a ghost there should be the ectoplasm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If that happened in the real world, then I would be justified, like that a ghost caused that would be the best explanation for the things that I am seeing occur.
Of course,
right?
But I would argue, wouldn't that then be a naturalistic phenomenon?
And if you look at my paper, that's exactly the anticipation, right? Like at that point, though, we might say, well, now we're including ghosts in the natural world, and therefore it's not really a supernatural phenomenon.
Because they are part of the, in your premises, they are part of the natural world, right?
Right. So I totally 100% understand the objection. I am sympathetic to that objection. I am willing to say, and so maybe ultimately then belief in the supernatural is not possible to be justified, because if we ever cross that threshold, like in the scenario I'm describing, we would include it in the natural world. My only kind of last thing to say about that is, yes, that might be true, but the supernaturalists who believe in ghosts right now would still claim vindication. They would still say, see, we were right. If we were saying, no, you're not right, because technically it's not supernatural because it exists in the natural world, they would say, you're being pedantic. You are you're redefining things.
If they could actually prove they exist, I would 100% give them the win.
Right.
Yeah, we wouldn't just be saying, see, we're like, it wouldn't just be that they're saying, see, we're right. We would be going, oh shit, you were right.
Oh yeah. And in fact, I told a ghost hunter, right? Like, hey, if you are right, I want to prove it scientifically, and then I'll believe it, and then I'll include it in my model of reality, right? So we do have to stop. I know we can go for another hour. Sure. I'm just going to close with one more thought. I think so. This is I think a difference between like the theoretically what is supernaturalism versus in practice what is it? Because again, anything that does exist in the real world, you could argue is part of naturalism, is part of the real world. So from a functional point of view, the supernatural category only exists to render ideas falsifiable. That's the only reason that concept even exists, right? Otherwise, why would you make a distinction between this thing exists and is natural? This thing also exists and is real, but is supernatural. There's no reason for that distinction except to render the latter unfalsifiable.
Yeah, I can sympathize with that most definitely. Right.
Okay.
And I'm saying that like theoretically supernatural claims are unfalsifiable because they, usually as they're stated, there's some way to observationally test them. But as you point out, in practice, the way that people actually defend them, they never are. Right.
They never are.
100%. Right.
All right, thanks. All right, Jay, it's Who's That Noisy time.
All right, guys, last week I played This Noisy. That's exactly what the conversation that Kyle and Steve just had sounds like.
Jay.
Is that a flock of penguins?
It's a flock of gremlins.
All right, so I got so many correct guesses, which I was shocked that I didn't get that many wrong ones. So let me just get to those. Listener named Matthew Morrison wrote in and said, hi, Jay, my daughter Nev thinks this week's Noisy is a colony of bees. And Nev, that is a very good guess. If you've heard a colony of bees, it has that frenetic kind of sound to it. So I appreciate you having your dad send that in. You're not correct, but let's keep moving. A listener named Seth Beach wrote in and said, hello, Jay, I think this week's Noisy is a group of sea lions and some sort of larger sea creature. It is not a sea creature. I mean, I guess, I don't know, Kara, did you pick up any water quality to this sound?
All I know, it's like pornography for me. Like, you know it when you hear it, you know it when you see it. Yeah. Like, it didn't give me eked out sea creature vibes.
Good. I will tell you that your gut is working. And again, lots of people guessed correctly, but there can only be one person. Robert Alexander wrote in and said, I'm lucky enough to have, ready, a sugar glider. He has a sugar glider and he hears this noise all the time. Another listener named Jake Walker wrote in and gave me a little bit more information. And Jake, of course, also guessed correctly. And he said, this is the sound of several nocturnal marsupials making a sound called crabbing. They do this when they're being disturbed while they're in their sleeping pouches. These are called, again, these are sugar gliders. They're a cross between a chipmunk and flying squirrels. I guess a lot of people have these animals. They're really adorable. And this was a whole bunch of them apparently being woken up and this is the noise that they made. I'll play it for you.
Yeah,
guys
it was a
again.
flock of something.
Very
it
funny.
does have a chipmunky quality to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, when you hear it, when you know what you're listening for.
Yeah.
So thanks everyone for guessing. Again, lots of dead on guesses. I didn't know sugar gliders were a thing.
You didn't? Oh, they're so cute.
Oh, I love them. I know about them. I didn't know that people had them as pets.
Yeah, they I think they like keeping them in their hoodie pockets.
Oh, wow. That's adorable.
Yeah.
All right, guys, I have a new noisy for you this week, and here it is. And just so you know, this week's noisy was sent in by a listener named Mike Berghart. And if you heard something cool this week or you want to guess this week's noisy, email me at WTN@theskepticsguide.org. Steve, we have just a couple things left this year that we're doing, but these are the big ones. We're going to be in LA.
Woohoo!
July 17th and July 18th. We have two different shows. The July 17th show is our super secret meetup, and the July 18th show is a combination live podcast recording, and lots of funny and creative bits that we've come up with that are similar to the Skeptical Extravaganza, but it is not an extravaganza because we didn't have time to run the full show. If you're interested to find out all the details about these two shows, just go to theskepticsguide.org and click events. And then we're going to be in Australia at the Nauticon 2026. And you guys can find out more information and buy tickets by going to nauticoncon.com or skepticon.org.au. There's still tickets to multiple events happening at these shows, including, of course, the main conference tickets. If you're available, we'd love to see you. And then you can join us in New Zealand. We have a skeptical extravaganza, and we also have an entire day of programming that the SGU will be providing for their conference. For all the details, you can go to conference.skeptics.nz or NZ. As they say, Steve, it's not Z, it's Z.
But they say NZ, but they don't say New Zealand.
Maybe they do. Can you confirm that? Philosophically, Kyle, how would we prove or disprove that they say that?
It just takes one counterexample to show that one person says it that way.
What if they're speaking in a spiritual language, Kyle? What do you do then?
Well, this is true. You could say that what I said was New Zealand, but what you heard was New Zealand, and you could never falsify that. And so then that's okay. Then that would be on.
That sounds like the McGurk effect to me, which is cool. And if you come to the Skeptical Extravaganza, you might learn about that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thanks, Jay. All right, guys, it's science or fiction time.
It's time for science or fiction.
Each week, I come up with 3 science news items or facts, 2 genuine and 1 fictitious. And then I challenge my panel of skeptics to tell me which one is the fake. Got 3 regular news items this week. I think they're actually extraordinary news items, but no theme. You ready?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Item number 1, an analysis of the scat of the California gray wolf finds a significant contribution of domesticated pets in their diet. All right, number 2, a recent study finds that individual human neurons have significantly more computational information than rat neurons, which is likely one mechanism for increased human intelligence. And item number 3, a new analysis finds that bilaterally symmetrical species from the Ediacaran fauna show signs of handedness or one-sided preference. All right, Jay, you're going first.
All right, the first one here, an analysis of the scat of the California gray wolf finds a significant contribution of domesticated pets in their diet. Oh, boy. The wolf, huh? I would think coyotes would be more eating cats and dogs. They're eating the dogs. They're eating the cats, right?
They're eating the dogs.
Oh, boy. And then you go, this is in California. Wow. Okay, I don't know. I mean, I think Kara would maybe have a better idea what's going on in California than me, but I'm sure there's wolves out there. You just don't hear a lot about wolves eating people's pets. But I'm not going to take that off the table. The second one, a recent study finds that individual human neurons have significantly more computational information than rat neurons, which is likely one mechanism for increased human intelligence. I don't know. That makes perfect sense, right? Our neurons would be more advanced than a rat's neurons. I'm sure Steve knows the answer to that because he's a neurologist. Kyle, you knew that, right?
Sure. Oh, what, that Steve's a neurologist? Yes, I did know that.
He does introduce himself. Hi, I'm Steve. I'm a neurologist. That's
all the time, every single time.
So, Steve,
right,
just to clarify here, you're talking about a single neuron.
That's what it says there, an individual human neuron.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're saying here that it has more computational information. And now I'm thinking like, okay, so what is a neuron actually doing? It's like relay. It's like kind of like a relay. And would it have more things? It's doing more than just, relaying information. Oh, God, it's so complicated. I don't know. It's interesting. I would just think, sure, it's more of 3D than a 1D thing. Okay, the last one, a new analysis finds that a bilateral symmetrical species from the Ediacaran fauna shows signs of handedness or one-sided preference. I think that's science. I think that the one about the neurons is science because the brain is insanely complicated. And I think that gray wolves don't eat a lot of pets.
Okay, Kyle.
Oh, I get to go second. Oh, man, this screws up my entire strategy. I was just going to agree with Kara. Okay. So what am I going to, because Kara's always right.
You've only got Jay to agree with or disagree with.
Yeah. Okay. So I actually have to think through this. All right. So, the wolves are eating the pets. It turns out that rumor or whatever about Haitian immigrants eating pets in Springfield or whatever, that trope about Haitians doing such a thing goes all the way back to like their successful
like 200 years
revolution.
Old.
Yeah, like it's just old horrible racial stereotype.
Absolutely.
And the group that started the rumor about the Haitians specifically in Springfield that the president was repeating on a national stage was started by a neo-Nazi group.
Not surprised.
But anyway, back to this. The wolves are eating the pets. That doesn't surprise me at all. My wife actually sent me something recently that said, like, we worry about our small dogs getting snatched away by hawks. We have one that's like 3 pounds, so we're afraid that like the hawks might actually carry them off. And the article is suggesting that actually the local wolves are a lot bigger problem than that. So that's what you should be more concerned about. So I'm going to say that one's probably science. Human neurons have significantly more computational information. You're tempted to say this is pseudoscience because you think, like, how could a single neuron have information? The information is contained in the interaction between multiple neurons. So maybe the real science is that like that interaction contains more information than the interaction in rat brains. But I also know that neurons aren't just 0 and 1s. They're not just on and off. There's more flexibility there. And so maybe maybe they're more flexible in that way than rat neurons. And that's how they're able to have more computational information. The third one, plants can be left-handed. Like, obviously, I'm simplifying that a bit. That's the one.
Fauna, not flora.
Yeah, definitely not plants. Right?
Oh, fauna, not flora. I am very, very sorry. Okay. So, but fauna can be left-handed.
Ediacaran fauna, which is, are you allowed to tell us how old that is?
Yeah, it's Ediacaran. It's over 500 million years.
There you go.
That one just, that's handedness seems to require a very large functioning brain. That seems to be something that is much more, you've got to have a spinal cord and all that kind of stuff in order for you to be let. So I'm going to go with 3 as the fiction. I hope Kara agrees with me. Good Lord. All right, there you go.
All right, Kara.
I don't agree with you.
Dadgummit. I'm going to lose again.
I don't know, though. I think that by the time something develops bilateral symmetry as opposed to radial symmetry, it's probably going to very quickly after start to show a bias towards one of those two sides. I remember doing experiments in 7th grade with cute little flatworms, and they all had a bias. They would like turn to the left or they would turn to the right when we would give them a simple maze. I know that those are much more complex, but I just think that it's a thing that happens in nature where organisms bias towards a side and they develop more useful skill. And I think it's practice, not nurture, not nature, right? Like the natural environment requires a certain amount of handedness, for example. So I don't know. That one seems not that weird to me at all. So the other, it's really between the other two. individual human neurons versus individual rat neurons. So the question here is not so much, can an individual neuron be computationally complex? Of course they can. Have you ever seen one? They have so many dendrites, and some have fewer dendrites. And the more they branch out, the more complex they are, right? The more other neurons that they attach to.
I thought we were talking outside of dendritic complexity here. Just the
why? That's part of a neuron.
I know, but I mean, it's too obvious. I mean, it can't be based on that.
I bet you that's a big part of this. I bet you they're more dendritically complex.
Well, of course they are. I mean,
I bet you their firing patterns are more complex because, of course, there's patternicity to how they fire. Yes, firing is all or nothing, right? An action potential is all or nothing. That in itself is binary, but how it fires and what patterns it fires, that's a lot of complexity there. So yeah, I think that sure, an individual neuron in a human brain would have a lot more complexity. So that really does leave me with the gray wolf one. I don't know a lot about gray wolves. All I do know is that they're northern, and I don't think we have that many of them. I think that coyotes are everywhere in California, and I think our gray wolf population is smaller than we want it to be. And so for that reason, I wonder if they're not actually eating a lot of domesticated pets because maybe they have enough deer and they're not fighting for that food source. But if you were asking about coyotes, this would be a lot tougher for me because, yeah, I'm pretty sure the coyotes are eating the cats and eating the dogs. So I'll say that I'll go with Jay. I think that one's the fiction.
Okay, and Bob?
Man, I'm leaning towards that one because that one seems so meh, and the other ones are problematic. Especially for me, the neuron one seems like my take on it is that you're not including. If you're saying a single neuron, then you're removing the dendritic complexity to it because you're talking about one neuron and not the power of the dendrites is how many neurons they're connected to, and you're removing that because you're saying individual neurons. It could go kind of either way. I don't know if you're including the dendrites. I don't think you are, but I mean. And the outlier here is this gray wolf one in the pets. It seems like so easy to skip over. Like, oh, of course that's true. It's just so boring, in a sense, especially compared to the other ones. Yeah, the bilateral symmetry makes sense too, because I could see how that bias could develop very soon after bilateral symmetry itself develops. So it kind of makes sense to me. I'll go with the wolf one. That one just seems like it was meant for us to be. Meant to be obvious for us. So yeah, I'll go with that. All right. Fiction.
So you guys all agree with the second one. So we'll start there. A recent study finds that individual human neurons have significantly more computational information than rat neurons, which is likely one mechanism for increased human intelligence. You guys all think this one is science, and this one is science. This is science. This was a little bit surprising because rats are mammals. This is pretty close to us, and
they are intelligent.
They are very intelligent,
yeah.
And the idea was that human intelligence was mainly about neuronal density, and then the specific pattern of connectedness. But
right.
what they found was that even when they isolated an individual neuron, that the human neuron, so they actually had to come up with a model, right? Kara, we always said there has to be a model. How did they measure the information or complexity of a neuron? And they came up with a novel method, and that's actually maybe more important than the specific findings in this study. They called the functional complexity index. And it basically means how complicated would a deep learning model have to be in order to completely twin the input-output complexity of the individual cell. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And what they found was that the human neurons were just way more complex in their signal processing than the rat neurons.
What kind of processing we're talking about?
So again, it's exactly what I just said. They had if you look at the way it processes signals and how we have to duplicate that in essentially a machine learning, a computer, which would take more information.
Yeah, I just don't know what kind of signal processing is actually happening at the neuronal
Bob, it
level.
does absolutely has to do with the dendritic branching, absolutely, and also the density and greater nonlinearity of NMDA receptor signaling. So it's partly the complexity of the neurotransmitter signals themselves, but also just the structure of the neuron itself.
Right.
That may be contributing to increased cognition in humans, that our neurons themselves add more information to. They're not as Jay said, it's not just yes, no, on, up. It's not just a wire. It's not just transmitting a signal. It's processing the signal to a significant degree.
So does this mean we need to put some human neurons in some rats and see what happens? We need some flowers for Algernon stuff going on.
That's kind. There's already happening, to some extent.
Steve, is your take that it impacts intelligence as much as the connectivity and the dendrites?
We don't know because it's the first study, and this again creates so many questions. I want to know. Hey, what about chimpanzee neurons and other and monkeys?
And also, I think, Bob, not to answer your question, but to come up with even more questions, you almost can't distinguish those two things.
Yeah.
The connection, like how connected it is to other neurons and how complex its dendritic branching is, are two different ways to measure the same thing.
Yeah, but this is showing that it's not just that, because the dendritic branching itself
is one
processes the signal in such a way that it adds a lot of information, even when it's not connected to other neurons, right?
Right.
Steve, did I mess up anything whenever I was describing what neurons do? Like, correct me if I got something wrong.
True as far as it went. It's obviously they're very, very complicated. And neurons are modified by other neuronal cells in the brain as well. The environment.
But I guess that's also...
like glial cells.
Glial cells, absolutely.
But that's also the point I was trying to make, Bob, is that like an individual neuron is a function of its environment. Mm-hmm. And so like it has been modified throughout its lifespan due to a lot of its connectivity.
But that's a great question, Kara. If you genetically, like made a genetic engineered rat that had human neurons, what would that do?
Yeah, I don't know. It would be so interesting.
I don't know if that's an ethical study, but it would be fascinating.
Yeah, and could you put human neurons into a rat milieu, or would you need all human neurons? Because would it just kind of become rat-like, that human neuron?
Yeah, right.
If it was just connected to other
If you put a rat
neurons.
neuron in a human, would it become human-like?
Exactly. Yeah, very interesting.
Does it become Mickey Mouse?
Definitely not, though, because some of this is like in the neurotransmitters and those receptors. It is kind of genetically baked in. It's not just like it's making more connections. Yeah. All right. Should I go to number 1 or number 3?
The one that is that proves
go to 3.
Correct.
Well, either one will give you the answer. All right.
That's true.
You want 3, Bob? Okay. A new analysis finds that a bilaterally symmetrical species from the Ediacaran fauna shows signs of handedness or one-sided preference. Kyle, you think this one is fiction. Everyone else thinks
here we
this
go.
one is
Glory
science.
or humiliation. Here we go.
And this one is science. Sorry, Kyle. This is science.
Sorry, Kyle.
So, but the question is, how did they figure this out? What is the evidence?
Yeah, that's the question.
Oh, right, because this is 500 million years old.
Yeah.
It's a fossil.
Like the trails that they left, are they preferentially
That's a
turning
really
right?
great thought, Bob, but no, it's not the trails, it's the fossils themselves.
Is one side slightly bigger?
No.
Are they all oriented a specific way when they find them?
Well, there you go. It's the so they had a fossil find. This is in Australia, and there's an Ediacaran fossil find. So they had hundreds of this specific species, and most of them are either bent one way or they're bent another way, right? So it's the Sprigina floundersi is the species, and it is this. It's not a fish, but it's a little fish-like kind of bilateral symmetrical critter.
An animalcule.
And
I love that word.
and they're either sort of bending to the left or bending to the right. And
At death.
At death, yeah, of course. And most of them, like 2/3, it was 2/3, 1/3, were bending to the left in the fossil, but it's a mirror image, so it's right in life. So they were right-handed. They were basically right-handed.
Oh my God, right.
Handed's always in quotes. Get to the audience, it's in quotes because it's obvious they don't have hands, but that just means dominant, right? Their right side physically is dominant.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about handedness when we talk about chirality too.
Yeah, yes,
Right,
exactly.
Right.
And that's way older.
Right. So that was the thought. I mean, Kyle, you actually hit upon, like if you read the abstract even, it says, the question is, were these neurologically sophisticated enough to manifest something as sophisticated as handedness? And so that was the question. And it's like, well, yeah, they can. So and as we've learned on the show in a lot of episodes recently, that the Ediacaran fauna was more developed, more evolved than we had given it credit for. This is just another piece of evidence that supports that. All right, all of this means that an analysis of the scat of the California gray wolf finds a significant contribution of domesticated pets in their diet is the fiction. So, what do you guys think was in their diet? So, Kara, you mentioned the deer, specifically the mule deer. I'll tell you, the mule deer was number 2.
Oh, okay.
So this isn't the fiction because actually it's the coyote or something. It's not the wolf.
No,
there is something.
They did a study.
I bet you I know what it is. It's livestock.
It's cattle.
Yeah.
They're basically
that's a huge problem.
eating cattle. Like cattle is 85% or whatever of their calories.
We see that a lot with our pumas, our cougars out
That's
here
like Jay and Meatballs.
Well, because if you take down one cow, Bob, that's a lot of meat, right?
Yep.
So cattle was 1, mule deer was 2, and between those two, that's like it's almost all of their calories, and then everything else was like small animals. But this is all DNA analysis of the scat. Dogs and cats aren't even on the list. They didn't even make the list.
They probably didn't bother with them. They're not worth it.
But they're eating chickens and skunk and grouse, and one's a black bear, but that's probably scavenging.
But also, I do think that the
and
California...
squirrels. I mean, if they'll take down a squirrel, they'll take down a cat or a dog.
Yeah, but they do not want to be where people are.
Exactly.
They're not like coyotes.
They're
in that
clearly
way.
not getting into the place where pets are, but they are getting into the place where livestock are,
Yeah, which is often in rural areas.
Yeah, right. So
and they're gated in. I mean, it's like easy pickings.
Yeah, it's easy food. So there's some pigs on there as well as chickens, but then there's some big boys: bison, bobcats. Again, I mentioned bears, cougar. Cougar came up.
Well, and what's interesting is, other than eating cougar, it's a very similar diet to our native cougars, and I know much more about our wildcats than I do about our wolves.
So these were like reintroduced animals, right? We're trying to have the wild wolf population get back to some kind of historic levels because they're important for the ecosystem, et cetera. We've talked about that previously as well. But of course, that raises the question of how are they going to interact with human civilization, and that's why they were doing this study. And this is a very big piece of evidence that it's a problem. They're interacting with us by eating our livestock. Yeah, and maybe we just have to accept a certain amount of losses. That's just going to be doing business. Then mostly wolves are wiped out because of this, right? This is mainly farmers killing wolves.
That's
so
what I was going to say. We have
livestock.
to figure out a way to change our laws.
Right. That's how we got rid of them in the first place, right? Because they were eating our livestock.
It's still legal, I think, at least down here in Southern California, for farmers to shoot a cougar, a panther, a puma, whatever you want to call it, if it is, problematically taking off too much of its livestock. I think. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the laws have changed about that. But we've got to update our laws to protect these animals. But also, we can't just say you can't shoot them and you're shit out of luck. We have to protect our farmers.
Can't they just build better fencing?
Well, I can tell you that pumas can jump fences. I don't know if wolves can.
Well, it's all a matter of how high.
Well, coyotes can jump. Like, you can't build a fence high enough to keep a coyote out of your backyard. I love that when I tried to Google that, it says, can wolves jump fences? Minecraft. What is that about?
There are wolves in Minecraft. There are fences in Minecraft, and you need to know if they will keep them out.
Yeah, so an average adult gray wolf can clear fences up to 8 feet, and athletic ones can scale 10-foot fences.
So you need 12-foot fencing. There you go.
Yeah, but that's so expensive. Like, that's
so is losing
really
cattle.
difficult.
So is having wolves eat your cattle.
It's true. A lot of people use electric fences for that. Yeah.
All right, Bob, give us a quote.
This is a quote from Paul Anderson, sci-fi and fantasy author, and also had a degree in physics. How cool is that? He won the Hugo Award 7 times. Wow. Just think about that. That's amazing. A Nebula Award 3 times. He said, I have yet to see any problem, however complicated, which when looked at in the right way did not become still more complicated, which is very, very funny. This has been called Anderson's Law. To me, this is related to the metaphor we often use on the show of peeling back the onion layers, right? To find hidden complexities and nuances in natural processes. And some people are discouraged by that. They're like, it's just like, they just get very frustrated and discouraged by these other layers. But it's a major driver of science in our attempt to understand the universe. So I really enjoyed this quote. Glad I found it.
Yeah, we also always say, it's always more complicated.
Yeah, I was going to say that was the first line in Steve's email to me whenever we started discussing. It's always more complicated.
Yeah, I love when we get emails about it because it's like you think you got a decent handle on something, and then somebody comes back with the next layer down. You're like, how cool is that? And you really appreciate it even more. It's just so much fun.
It's also why if you are thinking about going to graduate school and you're worried that you won't be able to come up with a good dissertation topic, don't worry about that.
Yeah, there's plenty.
There's plenty.
Well, hey, we're going to see all you guys, not you, Kyle, but it was nice having you on the show. But everyone else, will see you all in LA and then down under.
Woohoo!
Can't wait. Yeah.
Oh, also, by the way, thanks a lot for bringing the heat with you.
You're welcome.
I don't know if you guys saw, but when you arrive to LA, it's going to be like 95 degrees outside.
Yeah.
It's never that
Well, that just
hot
confirms
here.
my theory that the world is trying to kill us.
I think so. Good job. Thanks, Bob.
And again, the next 4 episodes are going to be live shows that we've either already recorded or one we will be recording in New Zealand, and then we'll be back doing our regular shows in August. Kyle, thanks for joining us again. It was a fascinating conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Ask me back anytime. And I still need to come back and talk about artificial intelligence and consciousness and that kind of stuff whenever my book and my great course, which are coming out at the end of the month. But when you guys get back, maybe we can talk about doing
We'll
that.
get you back sometime. And until next week, this is your Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. Skeptic's Guide to the Universe is produced by SGU Productions, dedicated to promoting science and critical thinking. For more information, visit us at theskepticsguide.org. Send your questions to info@theskepticsguide.org. And if you would like to support the show and all the work that we do, go to patreon.com/skepticsguide and consider becoming a patron and becoming part of the SGU community. Our listeners and supporters are what make SGU possible.